Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto is in the bingo book Chunin exams. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. As he took a large drag from the pipe in his mouth, he stared at the boy in front of him sternly. A Chunin held the boy by the scruff of the neck and was glaring at him angrily. The subject of his ire could be no older than 4, and yet he still had the audacity to stare at the fully grown man holding him with nothing short of contempt. The look was well returned by the adult, although if Sarutobi was honest with himself, the sight of a Chunin and the boy staring off against each other was quite amusing. "You may leave him with me." He dismissed the Chunin, who took particular delight in dropping the boy on the floor before storming out of the room. "Naruto, I've told you off for this before." He gave the boy a frustrated look which only seemed to invigorate the rebellious demeanor of the blonde. "Don't care, I want to be a ninja." The Hokage rubbed his forehead to calm his nerves. Sneaking into the academy and hanging off the ceiling is not the right way to go about it. He intended to lecture the boy but could still only find amusement in the situation. When Naruto was no more than 2, he had declared boisterously to the orphanage, "I'm gonna be a ninja." The matron of the institution thought nothing of it. Children always developed pipe dreams when they were younger that would eventually either fizzle out or turn into an adult ambition. Of course, they had failed to take into account the boy's ingenuity. He had snuck out of the grasp of his caretakers several times over the next few years and silently watched the genin who were training in the area near the orphanage. Somehow, whether through sheer luck of inherent genius, the boy had learned how to harness his chakra when he was 3. If Sarutobi were honest, it was no real shock considering his parents. No, the surprises had yet to come. Within a few months he had learnt to walk on walls and water, which made his ability to disappear out of the orphanage all the much more higher. He eventually discovered where the academy was, and so from the age of around 3½ onwards he would sneak into classrooms and stick off the roof or walls to watch the lectures occurring. Eventually the Chunin instructors would notice him, which would lead to the usual confrontation that the Hokage was currently experiencing. If you were honest, he just didn't know what to do with the precocious child. The boy would learn how to be a shinobi with or without permission, that much was obvious. But at the age of 4 he was still much too young to be enrolled in the academy. The only way he could feasibly control the blonde would be to give him what he wanted, but that would require personal instruction from someone. He himself didn't have the time, and he refused to allow the boy to fall into the hands of Danzo. Regardless, the boy had to be given what he wanted before he began looking elsewhere for it. "Naruto." "Hokage-sama?" The boy's small voice didn't serve well with the respectful tone he used. "How would you like to be officially trained to be a shinobi?" The boy's face lit up faster than the elderly man had ever seen before, and he was practically bouncing up and down on the spot. Yeah." A shit-eating grin threatened to split the boy's face open. Sarutobi gave him another stern look before adding, "Are you sure? I think you are too young, but your determination justifies such a head start. I'll do anything." At the time, the boy didn't realize the significance of what he said, but the Hokage took it in stride. "Very well. If you're good for the next week in the orphanage, then I'll employ someone to look over your training." Naruto nodded enthusiastically as the Sandame spoke, while the man himself thought over who could possibly be used in order to oversee the boy's progress. He'd have to call in a few favors. "Nami no Kuni, 8 years later. Stay out of this fight, this guy is beyond your level." Even as he said it, he knew that his students wouldn't have joined in regardless. Sasuke was glaring angrily at their enemy, but even his usual Uchiha pride couldn't disguise his fear. Sakura meanwhile was positively terrified at the way she was sweating and gripping her kunai shakily was anything to go by. His last student, Hiroki, was frozen in shock at the man, which, compared to his usual boisterous manner, spoke for itself. Kakashi sighed. He needed to end this quick before his team did something stupid. Moments later. It was a simple thing really, even in his injured state. He did his best to hide his chakra signal and, using his extensive knowledge surrounding stealth, managed to sneak up behind the girl. Or was it a boy? Regardless, he soon found himself behind the person, and with a flick of the wrist his kunai was struck across their neck. Blood spurted out immediately and coated his body as his victim's eyes widened in shock before immediately going motionless. It was such a shame really for such a young shinobi to be so enamored with a missing nin, but that was the way of the world he lived in, and so he took the situation in stride. And to think the foolish boy had thought that his Kiri Hunter Nin costume would trick him. No, if anyone had the time to study him and half a brain to go with it, then they would easily have realized his deception. Shaking his head, he forced himself not to think about the kill. Besides, he had someone else to deal with before he could have that much-needed rest he had been waiting for. First he had to kill Momochi Zabuza. Then, Uzumaki Naruto could rest. Meanwhile, run. He knew it was over from the moment he was caught in the water prison. He could feel the oxygen in the sphere slowly leaving in his team, slack-jawed and terrified of the man to the right of him, could do nothing about it. So rather than them lose their lives, he had willed them to leave. Even his demanding tone couldn't slap them out of their fear-induced shock, however, and as the missing nin produced clones, he realized that he was going to watch his team die. The clones were summoned out of the lake surrounding him and began to stalk toward the three horrified genin on the waterfront. Tazuna, their blasted client, was probably wetting his pants at this point if the look of despair on his face was anything to go by. Even Sasuke, the cold genius of his year, was stuck in place by the raw killing intent of the man before them. Finally, the clones reached land and drew their blades. "I'm going to enjoy killing you, wannabe Shin." The man's dark taunt was cut off as all the clones suddenly dispelled, puddles forming around the feet. As they fell, Kakashi realized that a blade of some sort had slashed across the chests of everyone. His eyes widened imperceptibly. His genin hadn't done anything. No, whoever had destroyed those clones was incredibly fast. Before Zabuza had a chance to work out what had happened, something barreled out of the tree line near the lake and tackled the man viciously. He was knocked from his place next to Kakashi, and thus the jutsu quickly dropped. The copy nin wasted no time and quickly retreated off the water to his genin. Before he could continue his fight with Zabuza, he had to know who this new person was, friend or foe. The supposed demon of the mist, meanwhile, was fending off a brutal taijutsu assault from the person who had interrupted their fight. He desperately tried to fling his sword at the new foe, only for it to turn out to be his downfall as the enemy ducked under the swipe and then landed a brutal kick into his chest. The missing nin flew in the air from where they had been fighting to near the genin and the copy nin, colliding with a tree. As soon as he hit it, two kunai flew from the direction of his opponent and pierced both arms. He screamed in pain and he was crucified to the tree by the forearms. Unable to move, he could do nothing to stop the person as they shined right in front of him and struck his chest with a nasty jab. The jab was much more dangerous than usual, however, as it was laced with wind chakra. It sliced straight through his chest, and before Zabuza even realized, his heart had been split in two and he had stopped breathing. The hand in his chest continued until it hit the tree on the other side before finally being withdrawn. It was only then that the Kakashi and his team got a good look at the person who had assisted them. Bright, sun-kissed hair billowed in the wind while a whisker-marked face stared coldly at the man he had just killed. From first appearance he looked around 11 or 12 years old with a slim build and short stature. He wore the standard Konoha shinobi attire except with dark red underclothing rather than the standard navy blue or black. A Chunin vest covered his chest while red gloves, from wrist to the tip of his fingers, were worn on his hands. A black headband and black shinobi sandals completed the outfit. It wasn't his clothes that gathered Team 7's attention, however, it was the state of disarray the person was currently in. Slashes through his clothing could be seen from head to toe, with one side of his red long-sleeved shirt hanging by a thread. He also had a large gash across his forehead that was bleeding profusely, if the blood seeping under his headband was anything to go by. His hair was streaked with blood while he seemed to be favoring his right leg. All in all, it looked like the boy had been in an intense conflict recently. "You are most fortunate I was in the area, Hitaki-san." The boy spoke politely, although the aloof and distant tone was obvious to all. Kakashi had the decency to look sheepish as the boy spoke. "I guess thanks are in order." He smiled as he spoke. "What are you doing out here anyway?" The boy's eyes flashed to the three genin who were staring at the exchange with wide eyes. "I was investigating a recent infestation in our lands. My findings were quite dire." The copy nin seemed to take this in stride and simply nodded at the enigmatic response. "Anyo, why is your appearance so disheveled?" The boy sighed as he replied, "I was discovered and pursued heavily by enemy forces. To put them off the trail I island hopped to wave, although now it seems I've got myself in more mess." He looked at Zabuza's prone body, the demon of the mist. I wonder what his bounty is. Kakashi shrugged. I'd say no more than mine or yours. At this Team 7's eyes widened even more as they realized the boy in front of them, who looked no older than them, was as famous as their sensei. Well, he had a partner of some sort hiding in the trees. I took care of him discreetly, but one might want to clean it up. As he spoke, his eyes gained a tired look to them. Kakashi seemed to notice his exhaustion and so added, Naruto, you should rest. I'm sure Tazuna would be happy to oblige? Although worded as a suggestion, it was clear to all that the man had no choice. Why yes, of course, the drunkard replied quickly. Naruto sighed once again. I'm tired from the mission, unfortunately. I wasn't able to rest for 2 days. As he said it, he seemed to ponder Kakashi's offer. I think I've managed to shrug off my pursuers. Then he looked at Tazuna. If you would be willing, I would be thankful. The man didn't reply and merely nodded in acquiescence. Right, well, lead the way, Tazuna. I'll leave a clone to deal with this. Kakashi gestured at Zabuza's hanging corpse, mess. And with that, the copy nin summoned a water clone quickly that immediately set off to deal with the bodies in the area. 30 minutes later. So, why were you out there? Kakashi's voice no longer held the light-hearted tone from the forest. Having finally arrived at the house, Team 7 had quickly taken advantage of the hospitality of the family, and the genin were all rest in the spare rooms. Kakashi and Naruto, meanwhile, were facing each other silently in the dining room. Hokage-sama indicated a need-to-know basis for the information I left to gather. Do you need to know? Naruto, while polite, tempered his question with a threatening tone. As an elite jonin and loyal member of Konoha, I think I deserve the right to know why you were in foreign land, severely fatigued and badly injured. Especially considering it may affect my mission parameters. Naruto tilted his head lightly as he stared at the man with cold indifference. Very well, I'll humor you, Itaki-san. The snake is on the move. I was entrusted to find out. And did you? Naruto nodded. Yes, and it is most troubling. He intends to strike at the heart. They continued to speak in riddles on the off chance that a genin overheard their discussion. Kakashi tensed slightly. Oh? Do you know when? He will strike from within during the climax of the competition. Kakashi frowned as he spoke. What competition was happening in Kono? The Chunin exams. The idea that Orochimaru would dare to strike in the middle of the exams was a terrifying concept, to say the least. What are you guys even talking about? A prepubescent voice cut through the air, and Naruto's eyes quickly shifted to the sight of one of Kakashi's students in the doorway to the stairs, looking at them in confusion. Ah, nothing for you to worry about, Hiroki. Kakashi waved the boy away. Put it out of your mind. Naruto chose not to reply and instead simply stared at the boy intently. Who the hell are you anyway? The boy's face squinted as he stared at Naruto in suspicion. Kakashi intervened quickly. This is Uzumaki Naruto, a jonin of the village. He can't be a jonin. He's like our age. Stop lying to me, sensei. The boy's voice was beginning to irritate Naruto's ears, and the blonde sighed in dissatisfaction. Kakashi seemed to notice his irritation and so gestured for the boy who had interrupted them to leave. Maybe, maybe not. Don't you have someone to bother? Kakashi grinned as he spoke. Maybe Sasuke? At this, Hiroki grinned back at the man and, without saying anything else, dashed off back up the stairs. Kakashi snorted at the reaction, the fickle mind of a child. Then he looked back at Naruto and almost shivered, the not-so-fickle mind of a child soldier. Moments later, Hiroki was a naturally curious child, especially when it came to the shinobi world. He had been brought up in a large, loving civilian family, and because of this his less-than-polite traits were often ignored in favor of lavish compliments. He was the star of the family, the only one to dare to become a shinobi. The family supported him in every endeavor. Finances and love were a right, not a privilege. And so when he was so easily dismissed by his sensei in favor of talking with a boy his age, Hiroki was irritated. What could the boy, an apparent jonin, know that makes him so valuable? As he often did when a question surrounding a shinobi was brought up, Hiroki set out to read the bingo book he carried in his bag with him. While he was arrogant and often overbearing, he did have the undeniable quality of a thirst for knowledge. It was one of the major factors in his decision to become a shinobi and was a large reason behind his obnoxious attitude. He simply couldn't help it, he had to be in the know. So the boy bounded up the stairs quickly, his brown hair billowing from the fast movement. He soon found himself in the same room as his two teammates, Sakura and Sasuke. Ignoring them, Hiroki went straight to his bag in the corner. The rapid pace that he was moving at, not to mention the manic facial expression he was displaying, piqued the curiosity of the other two in the room. "Hiroki, what are you doing?" Sakura asked. Sasuke feigned disinterest, although the way his sneering eyes followed the boy indicated otherwise. "I found out the name of that asshole who interrupted the fight," Hiroki boasted loudly. "I'm gonna check if he's in the bingo book." Sasuke snorted at the boy. Calling the person who saved them an asshole was stupid even to the prideful Uchiha boy. Sakura, meanwhile, had no such self-control. "Yubaka. He saved us, you shouldn't call him names." She looked at the other boy in the room, "But I'm sure Sasuke-kun would have saved us anyway." The boy didn't visibly react to the comment, although internally he was sneering in disdain. What a weak girl. Uzi aha. Here he is, Uzumaki Naruto. The boy's eyes twitched as he read the information. Wait. This can't be right. Hiroki reread the information for a second time before snorting in disgust. "Pa. I knew these books were bullshit." He absent-mindedly threw the book at his bag. Sakura looked at him in confusion. "The bingo book is a text controlled by the Konoha administrative offices, it's certified." The horrified expression she displayed at the thought of Hiroki dismissing something that was certified was utterly ridiculous to the only other boy in the room. The raven-haired boy looked at the now discarded book for a moment before standing and walking over to it. The page was still open from where Hiroki had started throwing his temper tantrum, and so the Uchiha heir found no trouble in finding where the other boy had read from. It was a page combining the information that all other villages had gained on the Jonin downstairs. That way Konoha was able to paint a picture of how much the world knew about their shinobi. Name: Uzumaki Naruto. Age: 12. Appearance: a small photo of Naruto could be seen in the corner. Affiliation: S. Konoha, Toad Summons of Konoha. Village rank: Elite Jonin, previously Anbu Black Ops. Moniker: S. Naruto of the Crimson Rain, Konoha's Slippery Fox, the Red Burst of Konoha. Classification: A rank, Jinchuriki, Sage. Danger status: APC, Approach with Caution. Abilities: Taijutsu, A rank, Ninjutsu, S rank, Genjutsu, B rank, Kenjutsu, B rank, Bukajutsu, B rank, Stealth and Assassination, S rank. Mission info: S rank, Classified, A rank 35, B rank 27, C rank 5. Personality and traits: known to be uncompromising while on a mission. Is unquestionably loyal to the Hokage, unknown if this extends to the village. Values the life of a comrade over the mission. Believed to be mentally conditioned, does not display any visible emotions. Has enhanced senses. Gifted with a sharp intelligence. Famous for his ingenuity and cunning. Important events: the Iwakusa Konoha incident, the Battle of the Waterfall Plains, all other mission info classified. Other: strong bonds with the infamous Toad Summon of Konoha. Most dangerous when backed into a corner. Close relationship with Sarutobi Hiruzen and Jiraiya of the Sannin. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he continued to read the description of the boy downstairs. How the hell could someone only as old as him be so powerful? Had Konoha been holding him back? But then, it was the very village itself that had produced such a shinobi. The boy grew restless with his thoughts and didn't even notice when the only girl in the team, Sakura, grabbed the book from his hands and began to read herself. She gasped in shock. "I've heard about him. Iruka-sensei mentioned he had tutored him when he was younger." Sasuke looked up at her in interest and she continued. "He said that it was one of his first students, that he was 4 years younger than he should have been when he started, and he said that it was scary teaching him." Sakura babbled on for a few moments before she stopped talking and suddenly gained a nervous shudder. "I wonder why? Who cares? It's all probably lies anyway," Hiroki announced jealously. "Oh, it certainly isn't." The three whipped their head around to see Kakashi leaning on the door to their room. "Naruto is quite the character." Hiroki snorted. "Yeah, right. How can he be that strong if we're. The unvoiced ending to the sentence was obvious, if we're only genin. Kakashi gave them all his trademark one-eyed smile as he replied, "Ah, well you see, Naruto was a ferocious little child when he was younger. He essentially forced the Sandaime into giving him early training. The three looked at him with deadpanned expressions as he suggested that a 4-year-old had forced the Hokage to do anything. He was going to learn either way. The Sandaime merely wished to keep an eye on things. So, he put him in an accelerated learning program. The man didn't bother to mention that accelerated meant Naruto had essentially been trained by Chunin until he was 5 and from then on was shunted onto either Anbu or Jonin in the proviso that he be made doggedly loyal to the village. It did work. The boy would die for the Hokage. It was the way it was accomplished that was the problem. The Hokage had found out some of the more unsavory ways Naruto had been taught only years after it had happened, and by that point it was too late. The damage was done. Whether by choice of the Sandaime or not, the boy had gone through some particularly harsh conditioning to reduce emotional output and increase mental proficiency. The result was a gifted, albeit distant, shinobi. The next morning saw a bustle of activity across the house. At 5 a.m. Naruto instantly awoke, his body accustomed to the early rising for training and missions. As he moved around the house to replace his bandages and pack up his gear, Kakashi, ever the vigilant Jonin, instantly woke at the slightest sound. He quickly noticed what Naruto was doing and so prepared to see the boy off himself. In the hour it took Naruto to get ready, Tsunami herself forced her way into the kitchen. With a small family and a number of shinobi to feed, the women had taken to getting up at 6 a.m. in order to properly prepare the morning meal. By the time she had finished it had already struck 7 a.m. and the two Jonin of the household found themselves at the breakfast table. Kakashi excused himself to wake up his genin, and before Naruto knew it his earlier wish to leave unnoticed was ruined. He sat at the table surrounded by the shinobi in the household and the family of the bridge builder. The group chattered away easily, Tsunami engaging in conversation with Sakura while the toe boys in the team seemed to be arguing about something. Tazuna himself sat next to a small boy who was glaring at the floor in dismay. Kakashi himself simply read his book in gleeful silence. As they began to eat, the silence was suddenly disrupted by Hiroki. So, he pointed at Naruto rudely, "Why were you out here anyway?" The three genin had all come to different conclusions the previous night surrounding the boy. Sakura was scared of him while Sasuke was viciously jealous. Hiroki insisted that the boy was a lie and that he was charading as a strong shinobi. The blue-eyed boy stared at the brown-haired male silently for a moment and an uncomfortable silence drew across the room. "I was on a mission." Hiroki snorted out loud and Kakashi internally sighed at the boy's embarrassing attitude. "You? By yourself? Huh?" The boy laughed to himself, hoping to draw a reaction out of the apparent Jonin in front of him. Instead, he received a bemused stare from the blonde. Naruto tilted his head as was liable to often do when faced with a confusing circumstance. "Whatever do you mean?" "Anyo, Hiroki Baka doesn't believe in your bingo book entry," Sakura explained hesitantly. "I truly hate that book." Naruto sighed and Kakashi himself, who had been watching the conflict silently, was compelled to agree with him. "It has a tendency to exaggerate." Hiroki grinned in victory. "I knew it. It's all lies, isn't it?" Naruto returned to tilting his head at the boy. "What particular part are you referring to?" "I haven't looked at my description for several years. It said you were super strong and stuff." The boy gesticulated wildly, like, "You have a nickname." He snorted, "Konoha's slippery fox my ass." Naruto wrinkled his nose in distaste as the boy spoke. So it was that moniker. Oh, how he hated that one. Kakashi seemed to narrow his eyes as his pupil spoke. "Hiroki-kun. I can assure you that name is well earned." Naruto's infamous escape from AIM was something known to every village on the continent. Sakura meanwhile, was tapping the table in irritation. Where had she heard that title from before? It was in the academy when they had been studying the relationship of AIM to Konoha and by proxy the entire elemental nations. They were near the end of the historical account when Iruka had gotten wistful as he described a particular incident. "You faced off against Hanzo." Sakura gasped in shock as she remembered, her finger unconsciously pointing at the boy in front of her. "I remember reading about it. You were in AIM to gather information on the current situation and then you were found out. You were chased across the country by Hanzo until you eventually snuck across the border back into Hai no Kuni." "Oh, how didn't I remember that earlier? After you got away from him, Hanzo gave you a title. It was Konoha's slippery fox." Kakashi finished for her. Naruto was a member of Anbu at the time and famous for his ability to sneak into enemy lines and sabotage from within, hence the Fox title. He didn't mention the part where Naruto had used the Kyuubi's chakra to escape Hanzo and thus was nicknamed such. The genin didn't need to know that particular part. Naruto, to his credit, displayed only irritation on his face. I hate that man, always titling people, as if he has the right. Of course, his hatred ran deeper than such a petty thing. The man had left him with a vicious scar down his right forearm from when he had gotten a little too close. The three genin all took in the information in varying ways. Hiroki was suitably humbled. Hanzo was famous even in the academy as a man of unfathomable power. Sasuke meanwhile knew that there were only 3 incidents of Konoha shinobi surviving against Hanzo. The first had been when Hitaki Tsukumo, Konoha's White Fang, had forced Hanzo into personal combat. The two had reputedly battled for days until finally Tsukumo was forced to retreat due to Konoha losses. Hanzo had been impressed with the man and gave him his lifelong moniker, claiming that the man was the first to touch him in battle since his ascension to the leader of AIM. The next incident had been when perhaps the most famous current Konoha shinobi, the Densetsu no Sannin, had faced off against him 3-on-1. In a battle in which Hanzo had been forced to summon Ibus and use his most widespread and dangerous techniques, the 3 Konoha shinobi had survived and so the man had let them live, giving them the title of the legendary 3 Ninja. They then took this nickname to worldwide fame in the rest of the Second Shinobi War and the Third Shinobi War, becoming the sword to which Konoha pointed at their foes. The third, and Sasuke had only heard whispers of such a feat from conversations between the Hokage and several administrative staff members when he had been in the office for one of his scheduled checkups, had been that a high-profile member of Konoha's Anbu had fought against Hanzo until they could finally retreat across the border. The legendary shinobi was so greatly amused by the Konoha nin's ability to hold off against him and escape alive that he had given him the backhanded compliment of Konoha's slippery fox. Both an insult and praise from the man. Sakura herself had realized something shocking. But that means you were only 10 when you fought him. The terrified expression on her face revealed how she thought about having to do such a thing. It wasn't exactly a fight, more a pursuit. Naruto would have shuddered if he didn't have so much control over his emotions. The man would have swiftly defeated me if I had stood my ground. I had to use unusual means to escape. Hundreds of traps set up by clones and countless attempts to trick Hanzo into fighting his own shinobi as they traveled across the land had been the most common methods. He had also engaged in unpleasant activities, such as traveling through Ain's sewage water and a slaughterhouse at one point. Regardless, he had survived to give the Hokage the information and that was all that mattered. The event had been the final nail in the coffin for his Anbu career. An illustrious 3-year tour of duty had seen him travel across the land, most of the time being chased in some form or another. Having escaped Hanzo with death on his heels, the Sandaime had honorably discharged the boy and given him a promotion to Jonin. While Naruto wasn't exactly unhappy with the turn of events, he was disappointed with having to leave the infamous group of shinobi. It had been where he had met perhaps his only real friends. Members such as Tenzo and the now traitorous Itachi had been so much like him he had drawn close to them. Naruto would have shook his head to dispel his thoughts if he didn't realize such an action was pointless. Instead, he merely finished his meal and prepared to leave. Tightening his clothing and slipping on his shinobi sandals, he turned to Tsunami and bowed lowly. "Thank you for your hospitality," he explained to the woman politely. She merely smiled. "Oh. It was no problem. We should be thanking you. Thanks are not necessary. I did what was expected." He then turned to Kakashi and nodded at the man slowly. As soon as he received a quick nod of assent from the copy nin, he opened the door to the house and slipped out quickly. It was time to report to the Hokage on his findings. As soon as the boy left, Hiroki seemed to regain his arrogance. "Pa. This Hanzo guy mustn't have been as strong as everyone says." As he spoke, Kakashi rubbed his temple in discontent. What was he going to do with Th? Naruto shuffled on his feet quietly. He refused to blame it on nerves. No, he was simply restless. He couldn't be nervous, he was a shinobi. Regardless, he still moved side to side as the Hokage quietly perused the document in front of him. His 2 advisors, Kaharu and Homura, flanked him on either side and waited patiently for the man to say something. Closer to Naruto sat Nara Shikaku. current Jonin commander of Konoha and a man of incredible intellect. Next to him was Danzo. The old warhawk was staring at Naruto intensely, as he always did when the boy gave his reports. When he was younger and in Anbu his mask had protected him from the pervading eyes, but now he felt bare, as if the man was looking into his very soul. The five of them were all around a rectangular table deep in the Hokage mountain, and Naruto stood in front of the table silently. The room was classified in where only the most secretive and dangerous missions were either given or finished. Naruto himself was only standing in the foreboding room because of the disturbing information he had gathered while exploring the depths of Orochimaru's bases. The wizened Hokage finally decided to speak. "This information is accurate?" He stressed his words. "You are absolutely certain?" "Hi, Hokage-sama." The man hummed for a moment as he thought about the information on the paper in front of him. "This information will not leave this room." He stared pointedly at Danzo. "Does anyone else know, Naruto?" The boy nodded slowly. "Elite Jonin Hitaki Kakashi. He requested a report and I felt it prudent to form a contingency plan in case I was unable to finish mission parameters." "A wise choice, Shinku." Danzo tilted his head as he spoke. The Sandame whipped his head around and gave a pointed look at the crippled man. Danzo never called Naruto by name. He instead used his old Anbu code name, Shinku. Sarutobi had requested Naruto retake his birth name, but the other man always refused to follow such a request. Homura interrupted the staring contest quietly. "If Orochimaru intends to strike during the exam, perhaps we should call it off entirely." The group of individuals went silent as he spoke, each pondering such a decision. "I would advise against such an action," Shikaku spoke up. "It may force Orochimaru's hand. As it is, he is predictable and the situation malleable. No, I recommend we play along." Kaharu nodded. "I agree. I would prefer if we didn't push the traitor into a corner." She looked specifically at the Sandame. "As we know, he can become quite capricious when he is under threat." The silent jab at Sarutobi's past actions surrounding the snake didn't go unnoticed in the room, but no one voiced their concerns on it. The two elders often did so, and it was a common occurrence. "Very well. We shall string him along for now." The Hokage announced to the room. "Kaharu, Homura. Prepare for the economic disparity that will be caused by such an incursion on our lands." The two nodded in assent. "Danzo, do what must be done to reduce enemy efficiency." The underlining meaning of "assassinate whoever you want" was obvious. Shikaku, prepare troop movements for the day and ensure the civilian evacuation procedures are up to par. The shadow user grunted as a reply. "I shall inform the required individuals and assign them as needed." Naruto, the boy straightened to attention. "Find Jiraiya. I don't care how, and inform him of our plight. Ensure he returns to the village as soon as possible. After that, find Tsunade and bring her back." The elders in the room stiffened as he spoke while Shikaku merely raised an eyebrow. The medic Nin had always been a sore point for the Sandame. She had forsaken her home when they needed her most and had only survived by promising to stay loyal and in Konoha lands. There had been countless times that the council had demanded Sarutobi summon her to the village and he had always refused. It seemed the man had finally lost his patience with her. "You're authorized to use force, although I wouldn't recommend it. Tell her she is to return to the village by the start of the exams or be labeled a missing nin to be killed on sight." Even the unflappable Shikaku widened his eyes at that. The Hokage was obviously done talking with the woman. "This will be classified as an A-ranked mission due to the requirement for it to be completed before the exams begin." The boy nodded. "As you wish, Hokage-sama." A few minutes later, the first thing Naruto did was head toward his apartment. It was fairly close to the Hokage Tower, as the boy felt he spent more time in the office than in his own home. He climbed the stairs quickly and opened his door with his keys. Inside was a fairly Spartan arrangement, a small kitchen with a dining room that doubled as his living room. A bathroom connected to it on the right, and on the left lay the door to his bedroom. He strode into his bedroom silently and adorned his usual red outfit. He had originally worn the usual combination of blue, black and green that Konoha shinobi were seen in. However, after his tenure in Anbu, his notoriety rose in the shinobi villages and he was infamous for the blood-splattered, crimson look that he always seemed to have. Because of this, he chose to change his wardrobe to one of a primarily red outfit. While it was partly a way to identify himself in the world, it also was a great psychological tactic, intimidating countless enemies. As soon as he was ready, he moved to grab his ninjutsu and slung it across his back. The sword had been given to him as a part of his graduation into the Anbu ranks and so held a spot in his heart for its sentimentality. As soon as he was satisfied with its position, he also grabbed the, in comparison, diminutive wakizashi that the Sandame had given to him upon reaching the rank of Jonin and attached it to his right hip. He had only recently mastered the use of both at once, with his ninjutsu being held in his right hand and his wakizashi in his left. Happy with his equipment, he moved out of the bedroom and then out of the building entirely. He moved deftly through the streets until he came upon one of the countless Jonin-only supply stations. As he walked in, he sighed in annoyance at the large line. While his mission was relatively important, he didn't think it would constitute cutting the line as he usually did. Being a fast response shinobi meant he was often sent out ASAP to deal with whatever issues the village was facing. He walked to the back of the line and almost groaned when he saw who was at the back. Almost, "Hey brat. Hey, hey." Mitarashi Anko stood at the back with a dango stick in her mouth and crazed grin on her face. "Get the fuck over here and talk to Anko-chan." Several people sent Naruto pitying glances as they heard the woman swooning over him. As he walked over, he realized that Anko's friend, Kurenai, was standing next to her and watching her behavior with varying degrees of embarrassment. "Anko," he greeted her familiarly. The woman had taught him about poisons when he was younger, Yuhi-san. He bowed his head at the crimson-eyed woman who raised her eyebrow at his formal greeting. They had never met before and the woman was surprised at his respectful tone. "I haven't seen you in ages," the woman exclaimed excitedly. And it was true. The last time Anko had seen him was during his tenure in Anbu. In fact, she had talked to him just before one of his emotional conditioning sessions. As he thought about it, a memory flashed before his eyes. 8 years after Kyuubi. The man drew his face back from the shadows and stared down at the shivering boy in front of him without any visible emotions. The boy was beaten and bruised, having been punished for his lack of control over himself. The boy had made the mistake of suggesting he had close friends. Such connections were useless. One had comrades and that was all. At least, that's what Danzo believed, and since the cripple had managed to get his hands on some of the boy's training schedule, he had tried enforcing such a belief on him. It was surprising when the man thought about it. The Hokage had prescribed the training and yet had no clue that the boy went through such harsh conditioning. It all happened right under his nose. Shrugging off the thoughts, the man returned his gaze to the bleeding boy in front of him. He was strapped to the chair and struggling to regain control of his freezing body. "Friends, what are they?" The boy looked up coldly. "Bonds." The man nodded. "And what do bonds do?" "Restrict." The man smirked. "Good." Naruto shook his head to dismiss the dark memories. When the Hokage had found out about the sessions, he had been furious, and Danzo experienced a public dressing down in front of the entire council. The man took it in stride remarkably well, however, knowing that the damage had already been done to the boy. Naruto no longer found it easy to bond with people his age. He was friendly with his comrades and people of his rank but went no further. To him, it only brought back bad memories. Focusing on Anko, he nodded at her statement, "I was 8. So what y'all here for anyway?" She grinned from ear to ear as she spoke. "I'm collecting some soldier pills and a new forehead protector." When he had been escaping from Orochimaru, one of the pursuers, a Kagaya, had almost skewered his head. Fortunately, he managed to get away with only a half-broken headband. Regardless, he had to acquire a new one before he left for the village. Not wearing identification was suspicious in and of itself. The snake user nodded emphatically. "I know the feeling. My first forehead protector lasted from Genin all the way to Chunin." She paused and sighed melodramatically. "It made me so sad, but Ibiki made it all better by giving me some fun in T&I." She smirked maliciously as she spoke, and Naruto clicked his tongue in distaste. He could never handle the dirty work the woman did. "Honestly, Anko, you should get out of that field," Kurenai announced. "You're just jealous cause you can't do it to your Genin." She seemed to think for a moment. "Actually, I might be able to get that organ." The woman interrupted quickly. "I'd appreciate if you didn't kill my students." Naruto ignored the bickering between the two and instead focused on the now dwindling line in front of them. Fairly soon they were at the front, and as the man, one of the countless decks, beckoned the two women over, Anko pouted and turned to look at Naruto sadly. Well, I gotta go Naruto. Catch ya. As she spoke, Kurenai merely waved a hand to say goodbye before following her abnormal friend to the desk. The blonde stood silently and waited for a moment before he was beckoned to approach an empty desk by the woman currently sitting behind it. He quickly walked over until he was standing in front and she stared at him for a moment. "What do you need?" the woman asked politely. "Soldier pills and a new black forehead protector." He smiled lightly at the woman, as feigned as it was. Nodding in assent, she quickly shuffled through the shelves behind her. "The soldier pills are right here." She grabbed a small box and then turned and threw them at the boy. Naruto caught them quickly and put them in one of the pockets on his Chunin vest. "And here is a new headband." As she said it, she presented it in her hands. The boy grabbed it quickly and tied it around his head. A sigh of contentment was let out as he realized he was finally fully equipped. "Thank you." He bowed his head in deference. "No problem." She smiled and then shooed him away. The boy quickly complied and soon found himself out of the building. He traveled toward the gate quickly, using his speed to get there as fast as possible. He soon arrived and, in the presence of the opening created by the gates, flashed through a set of hand seals. "Kachiyose no jutsu," he muttered as he slammed the palm of his hand down on the ground. Smoke whirled around the technique before finally dissipating. In its place stood a small toad. Mostly red in color, the toad had blue markings on its head and ears and a set of goggles around its neck. It was Kosuke, a prominent messenger toad that Naruto often used. "Naruto-sama." The toad bowed lowly. Most of the younger toads were incredibly respectful to the blonde while the older spoke on familiar terms with him. Only the two sage toads, Shima and Fukasaku, talked down to him, and it was in an endearing way. "Kosuke, I need you to find Jiraiya and deliver a message." He paused for a moment and spoke lowly. "The monkey requests an immediate audience concerning the snake, no exceptions. Stress the importance of this message." He looked at the toad intensely for a moment. "He has to return to the village as soon as possible. If you can't find him within the week, let me know and I'll take over." The toad sat silently and nodded as the boy spoke, indicating his understanding of what was required of him. "Of course, Naruto-sama. I'll get straight to it." And with that, the toad disappeared in another puff of smoke. The blonde knew the toad had returned to the mountain in order to both inform the elder toads and question the rest on the current whereabouts of Jiraiya. Satisfied with one half of his mission being completed, he turned his focus to the much more difficult part, finding and convincing Tsunade to return. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he shouted as 500 clones popped into existence around the gate opening. He could see the indignant glares of Katetsu and Izumo as their view was blocked by hundreds of bodies, but he was sure they'd forgive him considering the reasoning behind it. Within seconds, the clones had shot off out of the village in completely different locations as they searched the countryside for Tsunade. Usually he would have had to flash his official mission scroll to the two Chunin at the gates, but one of the advantages of being a Jonin, and one in the Sandame's trusted inner circle at that, was the ability to slip past the bureaucratic red tape. He was able to get away with avoiding the usual check-ins shinobi would have to go through before leaving the village. Before he himself could get through the village gates, however, he was met with the sight of Kakashi and his team returning from their mission. Adopting his usual pose of his right hand leaning on his wakizashi, he walked toward the group quietly. He passed Katetsu and Izumo as he did so, with both Chunin raising their fists in anger due to the clones he had sent running. "Uzumaki-san, I swear to God." Katetsu grumbled angrily. This caught the attention of Team 7, who all noticed Naruto's fully equipped appearance and notable lack of injuries in bewilderment. Before they could comment, however, they were distracted by the sight of Izumo hitting his partner over the head half-heartedly. "Katetsu, he obviously has a reason." The man spoke in a deadpanned voice. Before Naruto and Team 7 knew it, the two had resorted to bickering among themselves. Ignoring the two Chunin guards, Naruto walked toward Kakashi with an eyebrow raised. "I thought your mission wasn't due to complete for several weeks, Hitaki-san?" It was true. The man had mentioned how they had to protect the bridge builder for quite some time. Kakashi merely rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Well, seeing as how you removed Gato's shinobi, I thought I might have a chat with him." What the man was trying to say was that he had sought out the now unprotected Gato and assassinated him. Because of this, him and his team were obviously no longer needed and so resolved to return home. Hiroki didn't seem to grasp onto the hidden message. What did y'all even say to him to get him to leave us alone, sensei? He grinned from ear to ear as he spoke, happy with the success of their mission. Sasuke meanwhile, gave the boy a look that clearly wondered if he was an idiot while Sakura openly sighed in exasperation before hitting him over the top of his head. Idiot. Kakashi's not going to tell you. At this the boy looked suitably cowed, rubbing the top of his head in pain. Naruto would have laughed at the sight if he were a normal shinobi. Unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you look at it, he wasn't, and so he merely stared at two in abject disinterest. Kakashi meanwhile, returned his inquisitorial gaze back to the young Jonin, staring him down and silently asking what mission had been assigned. Leaving so soon, Naruto? He smiled as he spoke. The blonde nodded, I'm to find the teammates of the problem. His convoluted reply was good enough to confuse the genin while Kakashi merely nodded in assent. A good idea, I'd say. Nodded emphatically, he missed the sight of his three genin preening to listen. Or perhaps he merely ignored them. Eh? What are ya talking about? Hiroki's insufferable voice pierced the air. Kakashi turned to his student and ruffled his hair amicably. Ma. Nothing for you to worry about, Hiroki-kun. The adults are talking. The boy obviously took great offense to his dismissal, if the way his face scrunched up into a furious expression was anything to go by. Regardless, the child went silent under the intense gaze of his sensei. Naruto, seeing a possible argument occurring, decided to extract himself from the volatile situation. I'll take my leave, Hitaki-san. The man whipped his head around, beaming smile back in place, of course Naruto. As the boy prepared to leave he added, oh, and call me Kakashi. The next day, as he looked around Tanzaku-gai, Naruto was shocked at the sheer size of the place. It was at least as big as Konoha, with every building being involved in the entertainment business rather than the shinobi arts like the village he fought for. He had only come to the notorious town due to a tip from one of the countless kage bunshin he had scattered across Hai no Kuni that the legendary sucker was in town and gambling. Several casinos had promptly upped the ante on their advertisements in a hopeful bid to earn both Tsunade's PR sense and the undoubtedly huge winnings that she would leave them with. It would have been insulting to the woman if it weren't for the fact that it was true. Everywhere she went, gambling places prayed that she would visit. Because of this, she was almost like a walking festival, and it was impossible for her to stay out of the public eye too much unless she underwent a henge. Shrugging off the thoughts, Naruto peered around the area silently, looking at the buildings surrounding him. He was in the red lights district and any of the buildings could contain Tsunade. It was simply a matter of time before he found her. Slowly, he walked toward the casino that seemed to have drawn the largest crowd. Sure enough, countless people surrounded a blonde woman's table in the hopes of having a chance to play against her. With the diamond shape on her forehead, it was undeniable. It was one of the legendary Sannin, Tsunade. He approached her slowly, the crowd parting ways to allow a shinobi through. As he neared, the woman noticed his figure and frowned slightly. He reached her and stood silently, waiting for her to finish the hand she was currently on. Understanding quickly dawned on her, and so she returned her attention to the game momentarily. Within a minute she had lost rather spectacularly. I'm out, someone else can take my spot, the blonde-haired woman announced to the dealer in frustration. She scooped up her remaining pieces and got out of the chair before heading away from the bustling crowd. Eyes followed her retreating form, but upon seeing Naruto follow after her didn't deign to pursue, their curiosity suitably cowed by the appearance of a Konoha shinobi. Only a woman with short black hair and a pig in her arms followed after them, scampering around Tsunade desperately. As they left the building and were out on the now suspiciously empty street, the Sannin turned and looked at Naruto. Wow, standards sure have dropped. You're not even a teen. She raised an eyebrow at his youthful appearance. Whatever. What do you want? It was gruff and not particularly kind, but Naruto had been debriefed on the woman's psyche. It explained in her files that she disliked the village and any shinobi from it. Tsunade-sama, she snorted at his formal tone, your presence is required by the Hokage. Her eyes turned into daggers at that. Well, that's too bad, 'cause I'm not going back to that hole. Naruto stopped and thought for a moment whether it would first be appropriate to mention Orochimaru's plans before resorting to threats. He decided it would be. Your old teammate, Orochimaru, now a scowl flicked across her face, is moving on Konoha. The Sandaime had requested that you return and perform your duty to the village. Why should I care what the old fart wants? No, I think I'll let them deal with the snake bastard by themselves. The woman's companion looked appalled at the Sanin's callous tone and stared at the confrontation in shock. Naruto merely sighed. Hokage-sama stated you are to return to the village before the Chunin exams. Failure to do so will result in a termination of your Konoha shinobi status and a place in the bingo books with a kill-on-sight order. If the woman had been angry at the boy's earlier comments, she was positively furious now. The sheer audacity of the Sandaime to force her hand like this angered her like nothing else. The black-haired woman meanwhile looked mortified. The woman with the pig in her hands began to speak. Tsunade-san. Shut up, Shizune. Tsunade interrupted her quickly, rubbing her forehead in frustration at the situation. She stared at the boy in front of her first in cold fury before suddenly her face morphed in bemusement. And you think you can take me? A greenhorn like you? I have been authorized to use force if necessary. Naruto intoned, ignoring the blonde woman's bait. The woman merely laughed in response. Rather than one of humor, the laugh was mocking and had undertones of frustrated acceptance in it. Fine, the old fool can have his wish. But, at this her eyes drew into a glare, he'll regret using me. Naruto didn't respond to her comment and, if the look on her face was anything to go by, she was disappointed by his lack of a reaction. Shizune, go get our stuff from the hotel. I'll wait here with our company. She smirked condescendingly at the blonde-haired boy. The black-haired woman quickly complied and hurried away from the two of them. Tsunade looked at Naruto in curiosity. So brat, who are you? Naruto raised an eyebrow in response. The woman sighed. You know? Your name, rank and moniker? Naruto's back stiffened suddenly and his eyes drew closed. His countenance, which had just been that of a lazy disinterest, switched to a professional, dull-eyed shinobi. Uzumaki Naruto. Elite Jonin. Commonly referred to as Shinku. Crimson, eh? Tsunade wondered. Ah, so you're that one. Such a shame to waste your life like an idiot. Shrugging her shoulders, she turned from him. Oh well, not my problem. Once again, Naruto ignored her bait, although internally he wondered what could possibly have made a woman like this so jaded. A few days later, Jiraiya sculled the drink in his hand quickly and smashed it on the table like a madman, grinning as he did so. He had just finished meeting with a contact surrounding an elusive organization that had been evading his spy network for several years, and so now, on the cusp of victory, he felt he deserved the right to engage in some unsavory rewards. Namely, sake and women. Unfortunately, that was not to be, as he was suddenly knocked back off the bar stool he had been sitting on by a puff of smoke in front of him. As soon as the action had occurred, the Sanin's eyes had scanned across the dingy bar for possible threats. Seeing none, he resolved to merely keep his guard up while inspecting the aforementioned smoke. As it dissipated to reveal a red toad smiling at him, he relaxed entirely and resumed his seat on the table. Kosuke, you scared the crap out of me. He thrust his fist menacingly at the young toad, who had the decency to look sheepish in light of Jiraiya's words. Apologies, Jiraiya Dono, the man almost snorted. He used to be, Sama, but ever since the brat had eclipsed his sage abilities he had been shunted to the side. But I have a message for you. The white-haired man merely raised his eyebrow. Do tell. The only person who could contact him through toads was Naruto-sama wished for me to stress the importance of this before I relay it. Important, got it. The monkey requests an immediate audience concerning the snake, no exceptions. The toad intoned quietly, you must return to the village as soon as possible. Now Jiraiya was definitely intrigued. The mere fact that he was essentially being forced back spoke of either an incredible victory or an incredible danger. For the well-being of his village he wished with all his heart it was the former. The colder, more logical part of his brain told him it would be the latter, however, and so he nodded quickly at the toad. I'll return immediately. Thanks for the heads up, Kosuke. He stood up slowly, stretching his limbs in preparation for the long trip home. The toad grinned. Call me if you need me, Jiraiya Dono. With a puff of smoke the toad disappeared and the Sanin whirled through the doors of the bar, heading toward his home. Meanwhile, they were close to Konoha, within a day's travel at the very maximum, and Naruto couldn't help but feel slightly irritated at the drunk woman's attitude beside him. Having had to deal with a severely disgruntled Sanin had pushed the 12-year-old's normally flexible patience to the very edge. If she wasn't spouting off about how much of a child Naruto was, then she was insulting the Sandaime and his ideals. Now while Naruto wasn't one for emotional outbursts, even he could feel himself reaching his limit. The Sandaime had taken him when he was nothing, a child of no more than 4 years, and had turned him into what he was. He owed everything to the man, from his shinobi skill set to the very fact that he was living. Having attained the rank of Jonin, he was privy to many of the previously classified incidents surrounding him. Dozens of assassination attempts, whether internal or external, had occurred surrounding the blonde boy when he was younger. They were all quickly stopped by either his carer, an elusive Anbu that went by the name Inu, or the Hokage himself. And those that were caught were punished mercilessly. Eventually people got the picture and the attempts stopped before he was the age of 2. Regardless, the aged leader of Konoha had protected Naruto from those that would wish to harm him, and so he had promised on his promotion to Jonin that he would serve the venerable leader unto death. He would live by the ideals the man treasured, whether he understood them or not. And so when he heard Tsunade, his own student no less, insult the man so thoroughly, he felt himself grow angered beyond what he would usually allow. Shizune seemed to notice his darkening gaze as they traveled, as one night, when they had stopped to rest, she had beckoned him aside while Tsunade slept off the heavy drinking of the day and explained to him why the woman was so bitter. "You see, she's lost everyone close to her," she had said as she explained the deaths of Tsunade's brother, Nawaki, and her lover, Dan. It was a grim series of events, one couldn't deny that, but Naruto was appalled that the woman would spit in the face of their memories. He had listened silently as Shizune tried desperately to justify her master's actions and had thanked her quietly for telling him. Other than that, he didn't indicate any response to the issues. That, more than anything, had informed Shizune of his still present ire. So here he was, glowering at the woman in front of him, as she talked in disgust about her old village. Such a foolish position. "Hokage? Ha!" She gloated over the boy madly. "Do you have no respect?" It was a cold fury that could be detected in his voice. He had had enough of listening. "Do you want to sully the memories of such heroes?" His voice was tinged with such asperity that Shizune had taken a step back in worry. The woman merely laughed in his face. "What? The 4 idiots? They're not heroes, not even close." "No," Naruto began slowly, "not just the Hokages. I am not ignorant of your past." He spoke carefully, but the harshness of his voice remained. "Nawaki and Dan. They wished to become Hokage, to protect the village and its people." The woman's gaze changed to shock as he spoke. "Do you wish to spit on their memory? Don't you dare say their name," she hissed as she stepped forward and grabbed him by the collar. Naruto grunted in pain but ignored her hand on his clothes. "I admire them. They deserve more respect than you give them." As she looked like she was about to punch him, Naruto quickly added, "I love my village and the people in it. I too want to protect them. Save them from those that wish them harm." The blonde-haired woman staggered backwards in shock, dropping him as she did so. An image flashed through Tsunade's mind. "I dearly love both the village and my comrades. That is why I want to protect them." "Dan?" Her voice was hoarse as she spoke. She stared at Naruto in both horror and surprise as the image of her lover appeared in front of him. "I love my village and the people in it. I too want to protect them." Her head lowered in shame. "Shut up." Rather than anger, it was filled with regret, and so the boy did so. He stood back up and looked at her silently as the woman regained her own bearings and stalked forwards, in front of the 2 shinobi behind her. Her face was lowered and she seemed deep in thought as she walked. Shizune, to her credit, seemed both surprised and happy, as if what Naruto had said was something she had wanted to hear for years. She gave a soft, sad smile at the boy before moving forward herself, just behind her mentor. Naruto resumed walking himself and took his spot behind the 2 of them as they silently walked toward Konoha. The final few hours of travel back to Konoha was notably subdued in comparison to the argumentative air it had had earlier in the trip. Tsunade no longer tried to rile Naruto up, and he responded accordingly, distancing himself from the obviously distraught woman. Shizune did her best to remove the tenseness of the situation by engaging in small talk with the blonde, but every time she tried he would reply curtly and then dissuade any belief that a real conversation could be held with him. They were incredibly close to the village now. It within a 10-minute walk and they could see the imposing gates in the distance. Even with her home so close, Tsunade refused to converse and hung at the front of the group like a dead man walking. As they finally came within reach of the guard booth and the two Chunin saw the approach of the legendary Sannin, Shizune felt a sense of relief wash over her. She hadn't seen her home in so long. Izumo and Kotetsu were gobsmacked by the sight of a visibly irritated Naruto escorting the legendary sucker and her apprentice back into town. It was common knowledge now that the woman held little to no love for the village that she had been born to. Instead, a deep sense of loathing and regret sat in her stomach and she avoided the place like the plague. So to see the woman walking somewhat willingly into the village she detested, the two were justifiably impressed with the blonde boy behind her. They didn't even want to know what he had to do to make her return. Regardless, they were thankful. A Sannin in the village was always good. Unless it's Orochimaru, but that's a different story for another day. Kotetsu beamed at the three. "Welcome back to Konoha, Tsunade-sama." His goofy smile wavered at her withering look and so he turned his attention to the others in the group, Shizune-san, Naruto. Before the two could respond, Izumo walked up behind his childish partner and bopped him on the back of the head. "How many times have I told? It's Uzumaki-san. I swear one day you're going to insult a daimyo or something by accident." The man looked back angrily. "Yeah, well, at least I'm pleasant when I greet people." Naruto tuned out the banter between the two. It always happened when he returned or left the village. The Chunin seemed to take a sick pleasure in being foolish around him. Although it was probably everyone that they acted like idiots around. Refocusing his attention to the distressed Sannin in front of him who seemed to be staring at the buildings of the village in deeply seated resentment, he gave her a pointed look. "We need to go to the tower." He specifically looked at Tsunade, "so that Hokage-sama is aware of your presence." The woman scoffed in derision, but he knew she'd follow him while Shizune merely smiled weakly in assent. He quickly began to walk through the village, ignoring the stares and attitude of the villagers surrounding him. Shizune, however, watched the entire thing in surprise. Wherever the boy walked, the villagers would glare and spit in disgust while the shinobi would either bow respectfully or stare in curiosity. While the boy had been harsh on Tsunade at one point, the boy had seemed to be a polite and, while stiff, serious shinobi deserving of more respect from the village. What had he done to cause so much ire? The blonde woman in the group merely watched the reactions of the population to Naruto in amusement. As soon as the boy had told her his name, she knew who he was and what he contained. The way the villagers were treating him only reinforced her belief that the place was undeserving of her presence. What made it even worse was the hidden lineage of the boy. To be the heir to a near-extinct clan and the son of a hero should have guaranteed a sort of worship. Instead, he faced ridicule and scorn, although the shinobi seemed to defer to the boy, which was interesting in and of itself considering his age. It meant he was either a prodigy of incomparable proportions or that he had been out in the field quite some time. Some part of her realized it was both. They soon found themselves standing outside the office of the venerable leader of Konoha, and the woman watched as Naruto slowly walked up to the Hokage's secretary. He politely asked to see the man, and the woman, while working on something on her desk, looked up for a moment and, realizing who it was, waved him away. She had said something along the lines of, "If I said no, would you obey?" and then muttered, "Just go in, you silly child." Tsunade noticed the exchange wasn't entirely hostile. In fact, it seemed the woman truly believed the boy would disobey her if the resigned smile on her lips was anything to go by. The Jonin quickly thanked her and was given a "no worries" before he led his two charges into the room. As the door opened, Tsunade was greeted with a sight she hadn't thought she'd ever see again. The wizened leader of Konoha and her sensei was smoking a pipe and smiling benevolently. She wanted to snort out loud at the blatantly obvious attempt to get in her good graces. Instead, she simply sighed before striding forward and staring at him intensely. "What the fuck do you want?" Sarutobi, to his credit, took the insulting tone rather well and merely sighed as she spoke. "Things are moving fast, Tsunade." He paused and contemplated his next words, "And I'm afraid if I didn't talk to you soon, then you would end up on the wrong side." The implication was obvious. He was worried about her loyalties. While Shizune's breathing hitched slightly in shock, Tsunade narrowed her eyes in anger at the man. "You dare to suggest I would ally myself with that scum?" Her words, although angry, lacked the usual viciousness associated with them. Instead, she seemed resigned with the man's distrust. "I might be disgusted with this place, but siding with that snake bastard goes against everything I stand for." And it was true. Orochimaru experimented while Tsunade healed. He was the other side of the coin to her. The man raised his hands placatingly. One must be sure. Even you surely still understand that? TCH. As cold as ever I see. Tsunade's eyes flickered with what seemed to be hurt for a moment. Whatever. Just tell me what I'm here for already. The battle of wills was finally dissipating, and it was obvious to the two spectators of Naruto and Shizune that the blonde busty woman had lost it. There was a moment of silence as the oldest member in the room looked out the window and collected his thoughts. Shizune, could you please leave the room? Sarutobi asked the woman softly. Hi, Hokage-sama. While confused by the order, the woman was nothing if not respectful and so obeyed the order quickly. As soon as she left, Tsunade lifted an eyebrow in surprise. If she's gotta go, why is your pet dog still here? The other blonde in the room realized she was referring to him when she said, pet dog. A part of Naruto's mind bristled at the insult, but he controlled himself and ignored his anger. Naruto-kun is directly responsible for the information I'm about to reveal to you. It'd be a bit unfair if I kept him out of the loop. Hiruzen gave Naruto a soft grin as he spoke. Suddenly, he held his hands in a seal, and the sudden glow around the room revealed that he had activated the countless security and privacy seals around the room. He turned and looked directly at Tsunade. Orochimaru plans to attack the village during the Chunin exams, the final portion, to be specific. A slight widening of the eyes revealed Tsunade's shock. He's that foolish? I'm afraid so. The man was secretly thankful for the woman's switch in attitude. I had originally called you back to reduce the chances of your defection. The inflection in the last word was soft and hesitant, as if he couldn't bear the idea. From the way Tsunade was looking at him, it was obvious she couldn't either, but it is also appropriate for you to return. You've been outside of these walls for too long, my student. You've had a superfluous amount of time to grieve. It's time you return to service. The woman's face morphed into a snarl. Don't talk to me like a child, sensei. The venom in the word was particularly vicious. I've lost more than my fair share to this village. The man's gaze hardened, and so he returned to the root of the issue. He sighed and rubbed his forehead in stress. I've always given you the space you've asked for, but the time for such kindness is over. You will take over the hospital and you will fight for this village once more. The only other option is resignation. He stared at her furious face. It's time you choose whether dwelling on the past is worth the cost of the present. Naruto shifted uncomfortably. He felt awkward being in the room, as if he shouldn't be privy to such a private conflict. Fine, you old fossil. She spat her insult out in disgust. I'll do my duty. But once this is over, I'm gone, for good. She had becoming deathly calm near the end and stared coldly at her old sensei. The man nodded in sadness. If that's how you wish it to be. Konoha, Elite Jonin Council. Shikaku stretched his legs under the table silently as he watched the proceedings in front of him. He was resting his elbows on the table with his chin on the tip of his hands, listening to the people babbling around him in mild interest. It was the first meeting with the elite Jonins surrounding the impending invasion, and, having just informed the group of skilled shinobi in front of him, they had dissolved into separated whispers of shock and disgust. Orochimaru was planning to invade their home and the Hokage was letting him. To the Nara's right sat Naruto, who was watching the discussion with what appeared to be both annoyance and forced attention. Most knew that the boy was seen as a sort of right-hand man to the Nara. His absolute loyalty combined with uncompromising approach to missions ensured he was of high value. To his left, Kakashi lounged on his chair with his usual porn book out, although his eyes could be seen darting around the room in vague interest. In front of the three was a collection of chairs that seated both the strongest and most intellectually gifted shinobi of the modern Konoha era. Yamanaka Inoichi and Morino Ibiki were squabbling between each other, infuriated that the torture and interrogation force and, by proxy, the intelligence division hadn't stumbled upon this information themselves. It was both a blow to their pride and a harsh black mark on their otherwise illustrious careers. Silently watching the two was Aburame Shibi, who had little reason to be involved in the meeting other than a personal request of Shikaku, who saw the man as a valuable second opinion. The current Anbu commander was sitting quietly in a corner, his masked visage hidden by the shadows, and his two most trusted captains flanked either side of him. The three were yet to say a word and seemed to be watching the fiasco with traces of irritation. Directly opposite Shikaku were two empty seats that belonged to the remaining loyal Sannin, although it was no surprise that they were empty. Jiraiya was under increasingly heavy strain using his spy network to counter Orochimaru's, while Tsunade had neither the motivation nor the knowledge to be of any use in the meeting. In the interests of time, the Hokage and the elders were in their own separate meeting, orchestrating everything from behind closed doors. The purpose of this meeting was to ensure a united front from the three particular areas of Konoha's infrastructure that were vital to the defense against the invasion. Ibiki and Inoichi represented the interests of intelligence and counterintelligence. The Anbu was represented by its two captains and their commander, while the normal shinobi forces were dependent upon Shikaku, Naruto, Kakashi and, to a lesser extent, Shibi. Alright, I think that's enough complaining for now. Shikaku directed the comment to Ibiki and Inoichi, and both immediately went silent. The shadow user grinned at their response before continuing, I think it's time that we decide who is doing what during Ide. Naruto resisted the temptation to rub his temple in distaste when Shikaku mentioned Ide. At some point during the countless meetings, someone had coined the term as a way to describe the final portion of the exams. Now it was synonymous with the invasion day. Ibiki, Inoichi, your role goes without saying, counter everything they throw at you and be sure to entertain any new guests in our beautiful dungeons. Several of the men grimaced when he mentioned the nickname for the Anbu underground holding cells. They were not pretty. The two men nodded and Ibiki replied, of course. Shikaku turned to look at the quiet guardians of Konoha. Bird. The Anbu commander inclined his head. The Hokage is your priority. His protection is paramount. Otherwise, you are to conclude the preventative measures we have previously discussed. During the invasion, your soldiers are to defend the village as anyone would expect. It will be done. His monotonous voice pierced the air. As Jonin commander, I will be orchestrating troop movements from Anbu headquarters. This means I won't be able to directly lead. Everyone looked at the man silently. What he was saying simply meant that he, as an individual, wouldn't be responsible for handing out orders to the shinobi out in the field. Naruto assumed that responsibility would fall to them. Kakashi, the copy nin, straightened his back. I expect you to handle the Jonin situation. Assign portions of the village to each Jonin and ensure that their presence on the battlefield leads to a cohesive front. Your wish is my command, master. The way he said it made it obvious that he had read it from his book only moments ago and thus was clearly a pornographic reference. Naruto looked at him in disgust while Ibiki chuckled in the background. The Anbu were as silent as ever. The man looked over to the bug user in the room. Shibi, the Chunin will be under your command. I want them properly disseminated across the village in order to provide full support. The convoluted logistics behind such an operation are precisely why I am asking you to do this. The shadow user was clearly trying to encourage the man, both stroking his ego and reinforcing the importance of his role. As you wish, the Aburame replied quietly. As this all occurred, Naruto got a sinking feeling in his stomach. If Kakashi had the Jonin and Shibi had the Chunin, then did that mean he had Th? Naruto, you'll be directing the Genin. Everyone stared at the 12-year-old silently, waiting for some sort of reaction. Having to handle Genin in a war situation was one of the most painful jobs one could ask for. Not only did you have to deal with the largest force, but they were all usually a little too confident for their own good, and orders were often disobeyed in the search for personal glory. Naruto, to his credit, merely sputtered in indignation for a moment as he allowed his mind to process the horrifying order. Shikaku seemed to take great delight in his situation. If his grin was anything to go by, because of this you'll mainly be overseeing the civilian evacuation. I'd also expect you to place yourself near the arena, both due to the high concentration of genin there and for the safety of the Hokage. He cocked his head. Oh, and good luck getting my son to move out of his seat. As he finished speaking, the men in the room couldn't help but let out a small chuckle. Naruto resorted to drumming the table and letting out a loud sigh. I'll talk with each of you privately about what exactly your role entails, but for now this will do. He looked around the room slowly. Despite what those elders might claim, what you do in preparation for the invasion is going to dictate how this plays out. Each of you are a vital part of our plans. Don't fail me. Dismissed. At this, the Anbu members immediately disappeared while the Jonin all stood slowly out of their seats. Moments later, Naruto walked silently through the streets of Konoha, ignoring the deferring respect from the shinobi he passed and the glares of the nearby villages. Not only was he being handed the largest force to lead in the invasion, but they were genin. It both deeply honored and infuriated him. He knew what Shikaku was up to. A 12-year-old could hardly give direct orders to fully grown Jonin or Chunin. At least not the ones who hadn't seen him in battle. He knew the likes of Kakashi, Asuma and Kurenai would listen to and follow him. They had all at one point been involved in missions with him and so recognized his skills. It was the rest of the forces that were the problem, as Naruto hadn't really had much of an opportunity to impress his comrades, mostly being sent on solo missions since attaining his rank. Obviously Shikaku felt he would be of better use if he was put in a less inhospitable environment. How he saw other 12-year-olds as people who would follow him he had no idea. If anything, the genin were less inclined to listen to his orders than the older and more mature members of Konoha. Regardless, he would perform his duty to the best of his ability. He just had to hope that he wouldn't encounter any hotheads. "Hey, let me go." Now that was the sound of a hothead. Even from around the corner Naruto could recognize Konohamaru's loud, obnoxious voice. "Shut up, you stupid brat." Naruto quickened his pace to intervene in the conflict. Whatever it was didn't sound particularly good. He rounded the corner with his hands in his pockets and was greeted by the sight of Asuna genin holding the younger boy by the scruff of his neck with another shinobi, presumably his teammate, watching in exasperation. Konohamaru's two teammates, Moegi and Udon, stood off to the side in fear. Before he could announce his presence, the argument reached a climax. "Look, I'm sorry. Just let me go." At this the boy tried to kick the Chunin's shins and succeeded in a glancing blow. "Konohamaru-kun," Moegi screamed in fear. "Why, you little you-know-what? I'm gonna teach you a little lesson in humility." The boy rose his fist to punch Konohamaru. Naruto decided enough was enough and quickly interjected, "I'm authorized to use lethal force in the case of a Konoha civilian being threatened." His cold voice flew through the air and made the Suna shinobi pause in his strike. "Naruto Nichin," Konohamaru's moaned out in relief. At his name the female Suna nin grew a contemplative expression on her face, as if she was trying to remember where she had heard that name before. "Who the hell are you?" The blonde cocked his head to the side. "Who I am isn't important. If you don't release that boy in 10 seconds I will strike you down, political repercussion be damned." To further exaggerate his point Naruto tapped his wakizashi. "You're just another brat, I'm not scared of why." His female teammate quickly interrupted, "Kankuro." She hissed in both anger and fear, "That's Shinku." He stared dumbly at Naruto for a moment before looking back at his teammate. His head whipped back to look at the blonde, his skin paling rapidly. He dropped Konohamaru without another word and the 8-year-old took the opportunity to scamper over to Naruto, hiding behind him. Naruto tilted his head to look pointedly at a tree in the corner of his peripheral vision. He had sensed another presence in the greenery and so stared directly at where he felt the presence. Sure enough, another Suna nin shunshined out of the tree and appeared in front of his two teammates. A gourd adjourned his back and he stared at Naruto with an almost bored expression. "I apologize for my teammates." The redhead turned to look at the other male, "Kankuro, you're a disgrace to our village." The boy looked at his teammate fearfully, "Jigara." Naruto paid no mind to the conversation, instead focusing entirely on the redhead, or rather, entirely on the essence of his chakra. It reeked of malice and evil and was undeniably demonic in nature. The blonde narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Who the hell brought a Jinchuriki to a Chunin exams? And an unstable one at that, if the reeking smell of blood and tempered insanity displayed on his face were anything to go by. He'd have to inform the Sandaime soon. It was a worrying development to say the least. "Shut up." It seemed the boy didn't have a particularly healthy relationship with his teammate. Naruto merely raised an eyebrow in surprise at the confrontation. Konohamaru meanwhile, was suitably cowed by both his previous danger and the threatening danger of the new arrival. Just as the situation seemed to calm down, a small pebble flew out of nowhere toward Gaara. As quick as lightning, sand flew up and blocked the offending object. Gaara turned to look angrily at where the rock had come from, only to be greeted with the sight of a smirking Uchiha Sasuke. Naruto himself was irritated beyond belief by the appearance of the boy. He had just attacked a foreign shinobi. The Uchiha also seemed to have no idea what offense he had just committed, if the arrogant expression on his face was anything to go by. Sasuke walked over in front of Naruto, who watched proceedings silently, and turned to Gaara. Who are you? Sabaku no Gaara, he intoned calmly. The redhead looked at the Uchiha in disinterest before looking at Naruto. Naruto of the Crimson Rain. You interest me greatly. Naruto leaned his hand on his wakizashi in boredom. Oh? I wish to test my existence against you. He grinned madly. Yes, mother would love your blood. Konohamaru whimpered in fear as the boy flashed killing intent toward the two of them while Udon and Moegi walked backwards in terror. Naruto merely sighed before flashing back his own demonic killing intent at the boy. Unlike him, however, he restricted it to only Gaara and no innocent bystanders were caught in it. The redhead staggered backwards from the sheer strength of it, and for a moment his face morphed into sheer terror before as quickly as it appeared it was replaced by a crazed smile. I look forward to seeing you again, Uzumaki Naruto. At this he turned away from the group and announced to his teammates, Tamari, Kankuro. We're leaving. The two didn't reply to him and instead simply followed the younger boy as he left the scene. As soon as the boy disappeared, Naruto whipped his head around and looked at Sasuke with a furious expression on his face. What the hell was that? He was positively disgusted by the genin's behavior. To provoke a Jinchuriki like that was beyond stupid. What? He sneered back at Naruto, as if he truly didn't believe what he had done was wrong. The blonde realized with a start that he probably didn't. Forcing himself to calm down, Naruto remembered that this was a genin. You were only trained in politics as either a Chunin diplomat or upon reaching Jonin rank. That little throwing act, at this he gestured at the pebble he had thrown, could have set off a diplomatic incident. Do you realize he was the Kage's son? He was hissing in anger at this point before he rubbed his temple in consternation. If you ever do something like that in my presence again, I'll have you striped of your rank. The cold fury that had invaded his voice spoke volumes of how irritated with the Uchiha he was. Sasuke shrugged, before he swallowed his pride and stomped off in the opposite direction to the Sunanen. Naruto merely sighed at his reaction. That boy was too arrogant for his own good. He turned to the three shaken 8-year-olds. I have to go talk to the Hokage. I trust you'll be okay now? At this he gave Konohamaru a pointed look. Sure thing, Naruto-nichan. The Sandame's grandson grinned from ear to ear before joining up with his two friends. Naruto waved goodbye and shunshined away from the three. Moegi hesitantly broke the silence. Naruto-nichan can be pretty scary. Udon nodded solemnly in the background. It was like a switch had been clicked, and in place of the polite but distant boy that usually offered them tips and pointers in training was replaced by a much older and grim person. Yeah, but that's why he's so cool. Konohamaru, as per usual, only saw the good side to the change. Moments later, you know that I have a door for a reason? The Sandame's voice pierced the air as he continued to sign documents in his office. In the window of the room a figure appeared, crouching on the windowsill as support. The person quickly stepped into the office, their blonde hair billowing from the wind. As soon as he stepped inside, Naruto walked over to face the man directly opposite his desk. I rue the day I ever introduced you to Kakashi and Jiraiya. Though I thank God that their unsavory idiosyncrasies weren't passed down. Naruto internally shuddered at the very idea that he'd dared to be a pervert. The boy ignored the idle chit-chat and instead cut straight to the issue. We have a problem. Oh? Sarutobi looked up in mild interest from his papers. Suna has brought their Jinchuriki to the exams. The reaction was instantaneous. The Hokage seized up for a moment, shock running through his system before he rose from his step and leaned over his desk. What? He demanded. Naruto tilted his head as he spoke. The son of the Kage, Sabaku no Gaara, is a Jinchuriki. The Sandame nodded imperceptibly, and he is in the village for the Chunin exams. You're sure of this? The man was harrowed by the idea. Hi. I encountered him personally and he forced his demonic presence on me for a moment. At the man's horrified glance he elaborated, don't worry. He didn't target me specifically. What I mean to say is that he is unbalanced, teetering on the edge of his sanity. At that point Naruto wondered if it perhaps would have been better if Gaara had been sane and merely attacking him. The Sandame breathed in heavily. He shook his head. Do you understand the implications of this? He nodded, hi. And he did. To bring a Jinchuriki to the exams without informing Konoha required some seriously suspicious motivation. That he was both unstable and going to be present during the invasion was too much of a mere coincidence. It reeked of dark intentions. It even suggested the possibility of Orochimaru collaborating with Suna. And if that were true, then Konoha was in a lot more trouble than previously projected. The one positive thing to come out of this realization was that Orochimaru didn't know that Konoha had caught onto the invasion. If he had, then he certainly wouldn't have revealed his trump card of Gaara so brazenly. To do so instantly implicated Suna and revealed information that Konoha did not yet have. So if Suna and Orochimaru were truly in an alliance of sorts, then Konoha would still be able to adequately prepare and catch them off guard. Well, I need to inform the appropriate individuals. This is a worrying development. The venerable leader seemed to have regained his usual calm demeanor. Thank you, Naruto. You've performed an admirable service to U village, as per usual. Naruto took it as his cue to leave. I only did my duty, Hokage-sama. At this he bowed before turning and leaving the office quickly, this time through the door. As soon as he left, a figure shimmered next to the Sandaime, appearing out of thin air. A white mane of hair could be seen flicking around, and the man's notorious outfit with the kanji for oil immediately identified him as Jiraiya. So, the Toad Sannin started slowly. Jiraiya, as the Hokage spoke, the man paused in speaking. If it turns out Suna is involved, someone will need to deal with their Jinchuriki. Faye, and you want me to do it? The man grumbled in annoyance. Sarutobi nodded slowly. You can ensure a more peaceful solution with your Fuinjutsu knowledge. He would be a valuable negotiation tool as well, that is, assuming we survive the attack. The man almost whispered the last part, as if he were terrified by the upcoming ordeal. And if I can't, Naruto will. The Sandaime replied seriously, and if necessary, he will have to kill him. It was a haunting thought to force one Jinchuriki to kill another. Such individuals usually grew bonds of friendship with each other due to the harsh lives they led. To force the boy to do so might crack his otherwise stable psyche. It was a necessary decision, however, as Jiraiya might be indisposed during the actual invasion. And what, pray tell, would stop me anyway? Jiraiya asked cheekily. After all, there wasn't much in the world that could go toe-to-toe with a Sannin. I believe my foolish student will challenge me directly. Yeah, no surprises there. The man was always a sucker for dramatics and snakes, so I might request that you be one of my bodyguards for the day. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow as he spoke. Well, isn't that audacious? And who would be the other? Sarutobi chuckled softly, but it was filled with a sort of lingering despair. We might as well make it a full reunion. The Toad Summoner sighed at the thought. The team back together all in one's place. Now wouldn't that be a sight? He paused for a moment. I'm not quite sure Tsunade would be up to it though. And it was true. Not only was the woman severely disheartened, but she was also crippled by a fear of blood. Such a thing would be disastrous on the battlefield. The Hokage's eyes hardened. She will have to be. I refuse to give her any more lenience. Jiraiya didn't react visibly to the man's statement, but internally was surprised. So the god of shinobi has finally resurfaced, eh? I wonder what sparked it. Jiraiya looked at his mentor in something akin to awe. Chapter 4. Calculated Impressions. So it's inside of me? Yes. There was a moment of silence. Well, that explains a lot. Naruto forced a smile on his face, but it came out as more of a grimace. Naruto, the Sandaime's voice was veiled with a demanding tone, do not hide from me. The Hokage leaned in sternly and gave the 7-year-old an intense stare as he spoke. It was obviously meant to intimidate the boy into submitting to the man's request, but it had little effect on Naruto, who had faced countless glares of different kinds directed toward him throughout his short life. Despite this, the boy felt tears prickling at the edge of his eyes as the man spoke. What do you mean? He was lying through his teeth as he spoke. I'm fine. He attempted to place a serious, calm expression on his youthful face, but the Sandaime immediately saw through it. He had been involved in politics for decades. An admittedly mature 7-year-old wouldn't be able to get anything past him. Regardless, the leader wished that for once in his life the blonde child would actually act his age and show his sadness. You are most certainly not fine, Naruto. Learning that a beast of the Kyuubi's magnitude is sealed inside should make you feel anything but fine. A hand reached out to reach the small boy's head. If you want me to stop treating you like a child, then you better learn to be straight with me. It was commanding, but also laced with an incredible degree of concern. Someone Naruto's age shouldn't be suppressing their emotions. For a second Naruto didn't seem to react before his bottom lip trembled and his eyes began to water. Slowly his guard began to drop and he leaned forward to hug the venerable leader in front of him as he allowed the tears to fall. The man returned the embrace and the two remained the way they were for several minutes. Eventually Naruto found himself running out of tears and a peace settled over him. His eyes gained a curious twinkle in them as he pulled out of the hug and stared at the Hokage. "I think I understand why." He spoke carefully and was looking at the Sandaime with confusion laced in his eyes, "but I don't understand. Why me?" Naruto stood silently in the grim trees of the Forest of Death and took in the sight of the foreboding darkness. The training ground, if you could even call it that, made for quite an intimidating location if you didn't understand or have knowledge of its inner workings. For someone like Naruto, however, an elite Jonin debriefed on every nook and cranny of the area, the forest was nothing more than that, a forest. For the genin running around inside, the blonde Jonin was sure it seemed like a terrifying place. Naruto himself was not alone. He could feel the coiled, permeating power of the Anbu squad around him being deliberately suppressed. For many the sheer potency of chakra in the air would distract them, but for Naruto it was little more than a grain of sand to his unending beach. The Kyuubi ensured that he was no stranger to powerful and dangerous chakra, and so the Anbu members were not even specks of dust in comparison. Regardless, Naruto was very aware of the powerful people he had at his disposal. There was a reason why he had such powerful ninja beside him too. The squad he was leading was one of the many assault teams of Anbu. Their singular purpose was to strike the enemy, and strike hard. In most cases they would be the main attacking force of Konoha's army, but in this situation they had been specifically enlisted on the off chance of the Snake Sannin or one of his many followers taking action during the second portion of the Chunin exam. Alone and without support, Naruto wasn't very confident in his abilities to defeat or even hold off Orochimaru, but with one of the best Anbu squads and in the Forest of Death no less, the blonde Jonin was a lot more comfortable. So when his tattoo seared with a chakra flare, Naruto didn't hesitate. Someone had signaled for help, and from the frantic nature of the chakra they were in distress. "Diamond formation. Around me," Naruto shouted quickly as he moved, darting off of his tree with incredible speed. He followed the trace of the chakra flare in deep concentration, trusting the team surrounding him to protect him as he attempted to locate the person in trouble. They moved silently and in perfect sync, their training paying off in great display. Naruto and the squad soon found themselves in a small clearing, a female body being visible on the floor of the forest. Naruto held his hand up and the squad immediately stopped moving. "Identity yourself." For a moment there was no reply before a hacking, shuddering voice announced, "Mitarashi Anko." Another cough, "Delta, Tango, 4, Charlie, 6, Foxtrot." Upon hearing the code, Naruto jumped down into the clearing, signaling the Anbu squad to follow him. As soon as they were within reaching distance, Anko began to speak harshly, "Orochimaru. Headed east. Activated my seal." As soon as the snake's name came out of her mouth, Naruto felt an overwhelming desire to head toward the man in question, but Anko's state prevented him. She was his first immediate priority. "Bird, hare, ox, pursue the enemy but do not engage. Inform any and all forces within range." The three nodded. "Lion, inform the Hokage of the intrusion." The 4 Anbu disappeared in a flash of speed, a reply unnecessary at the time. As soon as they had left, Naruto looked straight down at the thrashing and pained ninja at his feet. He went onto his knees and moved his hands toward her shoulder. "Try to stop moving," he intoned quietly. Anko quickly obeyed and stilled her movements so that Naruto could get a good look at her cursed seal. After a moment of inspection, Naruto let out a low sigh. "Jiraiya sensei's Fuijutsu is still intact. Your willpower was strong enough to prevent any permanent effects from him activating it." As soon as he realized she didn't have any threatening injuries, the blonde Jonin stood and gave her a small glare. "That chakra flare was late, Anko." "Why?" Anko grimaced in anger. "Knowing this was coming, I intended to take Orochimaru to the grave with me using Sojusose no Jutsu." Usually, if someone were to ask Naruto what he thought of the woman in front of him, he would describe her as independent, powerful and slightly unhinged by choice, but now, seeing her in pain on the floor writhing like an animal as the result of her obsession to end her former master's life, he could see how truly broken she still was. Right now, her insanity didn't seem so much as a clever ploy as a defense mechanism. So you thought it wasn't necessary to inform us of an S-rank shinobi breaching our defenses? Naruto's chakra began to flare in frustration. Hokage-sama will be hearing about this. It's clear you're still too emotionally invested. Anko replied to his tongue lashing with a flare of her own chakra. A report like this would spell the end of her push for full Jonin for at least a year. Naruto didn't physically react to her chakra, calmly explaining, "Do we have a problem, Tokubetsu Jonin Mitarashi Anko?" At her silence he nodded, "Go get yourself checked out at the tower. I can only help with the effects Orochimaru has had on your seal, not on your body." She didn't bother to reply to him, instead darting off in a huff. Naruto would have followed her, but he knew that she was suitably cowed now and would do as told. A sliver of guilt hit him when he thought of how harshly he had treated her. The young woman had been one of the few in Konoha to treat him the same from his moments as a young child to his rise through the ranks. He dispelled such thoughts coldly. His position as an elite Jonin didn't afford him the luxury of guilt. The Namikaze decided to instead to pursue his teammates and get to the bottom of the intrusion by the Snake Sanin. Understanding the need for speed, the blonde-haired boy moved quickly through the trees, his speed causing the leaves to rustle loudly as he passed. The wind itself began to pick up around him from jump to jump, and before long he was almost unnoticeable to the naked eye. It only took him a minute to catch up to the 3 Anbu he had sent ahead, seeing them standing at the exit of the Forest of Death. The 3 were clearly furious for some reason, their chakra permeating through the air with killing intent and their postures rigid with anger. When he landed outside the fence, Naruto didn't bother to ask them why they were angry because it was already clear. They had lost Orochimaru's scent. "We tracked him to the end of the forest Uzumaki Taiko, but then his trail goes cold." Hare explained uneasily, his disappointment clear. Naruto took a moment to compose himself before nodding, "It's only expected, he is a slippery individual. Don't bother continuing protocol, he's already long gone." Naruto turned his head slowly to the forest behind him before adding, "By now Hokage-sama would have been informed anyway, which means it's no longer a problem." And it was true. Naruto trusted Lion to have completed his task, which in turn meant that the Sandaime knew of Orochimaru's presence but chose not to alert the village. Obviously the Hokage came to the same conclusion as Naruto in that the Snake Sanin would escape before any worthwhile action could be taken. It was either that, or the Hokage was not willing to risk the current act of ignorance they were maintaining toward the criminals' invasion plans. Regardless, Naruto knew that the Hokage would be expecting his prompt arrival for a debrief, and so he turned toward the tower, signaling with Enbu sign language for the 3 shinobi around him to follow him. They did so immediately and the group shot off quickly, heading toward the center of the forest at a fairly fast pace. To any genin around them they would only be a flicker. They moved silently, something Naruto appreciated as a requirement of being part of Anbu. Anyone who had ever been or still was a part of the elusive group had experienced firsthand the crucial need for quiet when on the move. Often the dangerous missions they were sent on meant that even the rustle of a single leaf could spell doom for them. The 4 soon found themselves within the sights of the imposing building and flared chakra through their tattoos to signal their arrival to the Anbu members that were surrounding the tower. After all, with the Hokage in the building, it was only prudent for a number of the elite ninja to station themselves in close proximity. Naruto felt a flare of chakra in response and took it as his signal to turn around to the 3 ninja behind him. "The Hokage will expect an off-the-books report from each of you by the end of the day, but for now take a rest, I'll see him alone." They all nodded silently and he added, "Dismissed." Without a moment of hesitation they disappeared from his sights, using Shunshin to move away. He himself didn't bother to wait out their disappearing act, instead moving briskly through the imposing corridors and rooms of the tower toward where he knew the Sandaime to be. It was only after he climbed his 3rd set of stairs that he began to feel the undeniable presence of Azuki Yugo, one of the Hokage's preferred Anbu escorts. She was standing outside a small, unimposing door to what Naruto knew to be a storage area for the forest. The blonde Jonin guessed it was precisely because of its relative lack of importance that his venerable leader chose to meet in there. The female Anbu member didn't react to his presence beyond a slight inclination of the head in a show of respect. He nodded back and opened the door without a moment's hesitation. He knew the Sandaime was inside and waiting for him. Before he had even closed the door, the man began to speak. So he struck. It was clearly a rhetorical question, so Naruto didn't bother to answer. He alerted us to his presence, made us tighten our security, and did so through a forest full of genin. Why? The Hokage was clearly distressed, and it showed on his face. Gone was the kindly grandfather, and in his place was the terrifying god of shinobi. If the Hokage was waiting for Naruto to answer, he didn't have one. He gave nothing away to my squad, sir. They think his appearance in the forest was on a whim. My wayward student is nothing if not careful. No, every move he makes is calculated and has a reason behind it. He growled angrily. I can assure you whatever he did today was something very, very important to him. He wouldn't expose his hand for anything less. The man's dark eyes shifted to stare intently at Naruto. What do you think he was doing? Naruto hesitated. Somehow this felt like a test. We can rule out anything to do with the invasion. If he was going to tamper with village security, he wouldn't reveal himself. He may have been receiving information from one of his spies, but even then I doubt he'd do so in such a brazen way. No, the only things I could see him gaining from this is that he has effected something not crucial to village security, or that he was trying to make an impression. As Naruto was finishing speaking, a Chunin burst into the room, worry on his face. Beg my intrusion, Hokage-sama, but Mitarashi-san requests an urgent audience. She says she has remembered something about a recent incident. The blonde Jonin raised an eyebrow at that. Perhaps Anko knew more than she had let on before. Tell her to come immediately. The Chunin nodded and left quickly. I think, Naruto, that it is perhaps both. The meaning of what he said was lost on Naruto, and he didn't prod further. The Hokage seemed distracted by the Chunin's announcement. Naruto felt the presence approaching him before he saw him. He turned around to face the individual and saw a young Chunin running toward him. While not indicating anything too extreme, Naruto could recognize the anxious expression on the man's face. He couldn't think of why in particular the man would be so tense. It was nearing the second portion of the Chunin exam, and he should be relieved if anything that his guard duty of the tower in the Forest of Death was nearing its conclusion. The blonde had little time to ponder the man's worried expression as he quickly neared him. They were in one of the countless rooms of the tower. Naruto had retreated in here after his debriefing with the Hokage to check his equipment in preparation to stand next to the Hokage as he gave the genin who survived the forest his speech. And the quiet room emphasized the heavy steps of the Chunin as he quickly came face to face with Naruto. Uzumaki-san. It even clearer now that Naruto could hear his tone. He was anxious about something. Yes? He replied politely. Hitaki-san has requested your presence, sir. He seemed to hesitate at this point. He said to tell you, Sasuke has been marked and that he required your sealing expertise. Naruto's eyes narrowed quickly. So this is what the Hokage had meant when he had said it was both. The Sannin had corrupted Sasuke and shown the Uchiha the extent of his powers. While doing so, he was trying to impress the boy. I'll go see him now. Where is he? Naruto quickly strapped on his last weapons pouch and tensed his muscles to shunshin away. He's at the main entrance, sir. His team only just arrived. Thank you. And with a swirl of leaves, Naruto disappeared. When Naruto arrived at the front entrance of the tower, he was greeted by the sight of an absolutely exhausted and despondent Team 7. Hiroki seemed to be clutching his right arm in pain, and the blonde Jonin could see under the gauze of medical tape attached to his elbow blood was seeping out. Next to him Sakura stood weakly, shivering every moment or so and fiddling with her now drastically shortened hair. Sasuke looked the worst off. Numerous wounds dotted his body, although curiously many of them seemed to be in an advanced stage of healing, which suggested he had received them long before the exam. Which Naruto knew not to be the case. He was rubbing his right shoulder constantly and seemed to be in some form of pain. Naruto immediately knew why. Orochimaru, the Snake Sannin, had attacked the three during the exam and marked Sasuke with the cursed seal, and, from the looks of things, he did so on the right shoulder. If Naruto were a more emotional person, he would have outwardly grimaced. The heaven seal was a truly abhorrent thing and perverted the very nature of Fuinjutsu to a point that the blonde, as a proud user of the art, found himself disgusted by its presence. He had once inspected Anko's seal as a part of his training under Jiraiya, and the dark mark's continuous connection with Orochimaru had, at the time, merely been a thing of curiosity. Anko's loyalty had never been in question, and so it was seen as more of a hindrance to the woman than a possible boon. For Sasuke, however, a boy who has little shame in announcing his obsession with power, it deeply perturbed Naruto. The seal represented an opportunity for both Orochimaru and Sasuke in getting what they wanted, and he wasn't entirely sure either would be able to resist. Even if the Uchiha remained in Konoha, Naruto wasn't sure the Sannin would be as lenient in letting the boy slip through his grasp as he was with Anko. He trudged forward quickly and soon found himself face to face with Kakashi, the man appearing out of the shadows of a nearby wall upon his approach. He stared at Naruto silently for a moment, seeming to judge how best to frame what he was about to say, before beginning to speak carefully. "Naruto," the blonde nodded slowly, "Sasuke here has a little problem. Something you'd be best suited to deal with." Sasuke had grunted in annoyance, but a quick look from Kakashi silenced him. "If you wouldn't mind?" The blonde replied quickly, "Of course. I'll do my best, but from what I've studied it'll be impossible to completely remove the seal." He didn't bother to elaborate, with Sakura and Hiroki listening in. Kakashi caught the drift and stepped away from Sasuke, instead turning toward his other two genin. Sakura, Hiroki, the two looked at their sensei curiously as he beckoned them toward him. While they moved away from Sasuke, the other jonin in the room quickly gestured toward the Uchiha to follow him. The black-haired boy submitted without so much as a grunt and followed Naruto as he walked out of the entrance and through the countless rooms of the tower. "You're lucky you finished the exam early," Naruto explained to him as they moved. "Otherwise I wouldn't have had time to seal the mark off and you wouldn't be able to use your chakra." Sasuke didn't bother to reply but seemed to recognize the significance of Naruto's words. Obviously there was a stage planned to immediately follow the Forest of Death without a break for the genin. They soon arrived in a dark, foreboding room, and Sasuke felt a shiver go up his spine at the sight of numerous indecipherable marks strewn across the area. The language behind them made no sense to the boy, but he could feel the raw, vibrating power hidden behind them and couldn't prevent the fear that struck him. Naruto, however, seemed to have no such worries as he strode confidently into the center of the room. "What is this?" Sasuke asked carefully. "A sealing room. One of the many in Konoha available for use by any Fuinjutsu masters or elite jonin." Naruto spoke as he walked around slowly, feeling the countless seals dotting the walls. The Uchihas grew a suspicious glint in them as Naruto spoke. "Which are you?" "The latter," Naruto hummed as he spoke. "Few are qualified to enter this room and only one is qualified to enter due his proficiency in seals." At Sasuke's confused look, Naruto elaborated, "With the loss of the Yondaime, Konoha only has a single Fuinjutsu master remaining, Jiraiya of the Sannin." Naruto didn't bother to add that Uzumaki Kushina was also a master of seals, considered the greatest in Konoha when she was alive, as Sasuke would neither recognize nor was he classified to know that name. Even then, Jiraiya's mastery over Fuijutsu pales in comparison to the Yondaime's. "And his paled in comparison to his wife's," Naruto silently added. "And you?" Sasuke, despite his best attempts to hide it, was clearly worried. "There is a reason Kakashi deferred to me, Sasuke." Behind Jiraiya-sensei, a minor slip of the tongue, but Sasuke's eyes widened as he realized that the boy he had been so envious of had been trained by a Sannin. "I am the most talented in the art. I will fix cursed seal you find yourself with." Naruto spoke grimly. "Now, take off your shirt." The boy found himself confused by the request but followed through with it regardless, removing the garment quickly and, when Naruto gestured for him to, kneeling in the center of the sealing area. There was a moment of silence as Naruto stood over him, clearly in deep thought. The quiet was cut by the quiet mutterings of the young blonde jonin, and Sasuke found himself unable to decipher any of what the boy had said. His mentionings of a bilateral array and nominal conductivity made little sense to the Uchiha beyond their literal meanings. Suddenly, Naruto stopped talking and flashed rapidly through a series of hand seals, and before Sasuke could blink, the blonde's hand slammed into his shoulder. "Fuja Hoin." Sasuke heard the cry before a sharp, piercing pain encompassed his entire body. He felt himself becoming light-headed as his body spasmed in agony before unconsciousness struck him. When the raven-haired genin collapsed, Naruto nodded satisfactorily. He had performed the simple evil sealing method on him but had layered it with his own Uzumaki style of sealing. That, along with his potent chakra, would be enough to prevent the seal from influencing Sasuke even if the boy were to by chance have a weakened willpower. It wasn't perfect, but it was certainly better than relying on the boy alone to hold back Orochimaru's seal. It was fortunate that the genin team had arrived a day early, otherwise Naruto wouldn't have had the time to apply the seal on the boy. There were rumblings of a preliminary finals being required, and that meant that they'd begin as soon as the time limit ended, which was in less than 12 hours at this point. The Uzumaki sighed as he allowed the events of the day to catch up with him. While they didn't, in the end, fight Orochimaru, the simple possibility of it had put his body into overdrive, and then his subsequent required presence for Sasuke had meant that he only now was gifted the opportunity to relax. Combined with his lack of sleep over the past 5 days patrolling the forest meant that he was fairly tired. When Kakashi appeared in the room to collect Sasuke, Naruto didn't bother to speak, only waving a greeting before leaving the room himself. He only had 6 hours break, so he decided to put it to good use sleeping. Naruto could feel the stick flying through the air even before it landed on his head. "You lost focus again." The elderly toad's voice reverberated around the mountain. "Do you want to turn into a statue, you silly boy?" "Sorry Fukasaku-sama." Naruto apologized as he gingerly rubbed the sore spot on his head where he had just been whacked. The stick descended again without warning. "None of that, Sama, nonsense in my presence, Naruto-chan. Shima would be devastated if she heard you using such distant language." At this the toad shuddered, "And we all know I'll be the one punished for it, so get it out of your system." "Ah," Naruto paused, still not used to the antics of the sage, "of course, Fukasaku." The toad grunted quietly in acceptance of the new way he was addressed. "Well, what are you waiting for? Get to it." The toad muttered dismissively to the young boy in front of him before pounding his stick on the ground to emphasis. Naruto nodded quickly and returned to his meditative stance, drawing the natural energy around him. Despite his earlier comments, Fukasaku couldn't help but be impressed by the speed that the child in front of him was learning senjutsu. It was clear he was much more talented in it than Jiraiya. The toad couldn't remember anyone who had ever picked it up as fast as Naruto was, and for a toad as old as him that was something to behold. In fact, the toad realized as he held in a gasp upon seeing Naruto managing to perfectly balance the energy for the first time, this young 10-year-old boy was surely destined for greatness. The great toad sage knew it, Jiraiya knew it, and Fukasaku knew it. It seemed that they had finally found the missing piece of the prophecy. "Dinner's ready." A loud shout echoed across the mountain. Naruto lost control of the chakra at the sound, and Fukasaku quickly bopped the boy on the head to dispel the natural energy before turning toward the direction Shima had screamed from. "Damn it, woman, we're busy," he shouted back. "Woman? Woman?" Shima's fury could almost be felt in the air. Forest of Death, Chunin exam preliminaries. Naruto stood silently behind the Hokage, resting his eyes on the sight of the exhausted group of genin in front of him. Aside from the Tsunade Jinchuriki's genin team, who looked to have progressed through the second portion of the Chunin exam entirely unscathed, almost every individual gathered looked like they had been through hell and back. Some teams in particular, such as Team 7 or Team 8, looked like they had seen the devil himself while in the forest. The blonde Jonin resisted the urge to sigh at their palpable fear. It was clear none of them had experienced true life or death experiences until this exam, and if they weren't prepared for the rigors of the exam, then the possibility of them surviving the invasion was marginal. Deep down, the Uzumaki child knew he would have to request that their teachers put them through some seriously intense training throughout the month break that would proceed after the preliminaries. It didn't matter if they got through to the final portion or not. They needed to be somewhat ready if he was going to be ordering them around during the invasion. His eyes flickered over to Kurenai and Asuma, the two conversing quietly as the Sandaime addressed the crowd of genin, before settling on Guy and Kakashi. From the grim expression on the copy nin's face, he had come to similar conclusions as Naruto. A loud outburst from one of the Konoha genin, an Inuzuka boy, drew Naruto's attention back to the speech from the Hokage for a moment. The boy was complaining about the nature of the Chunin exams, as if the alternative of actual warfare was better. For a moment the blue-eyed Jonin wondered how these children would fare in a war before dismissing the thought entirely: they would die. And fast. Before too long the Hokage finished his speech and the fights began. Naruto turned away in disinterest, moving silently toward the Jonin sensei lounging on the walls near their students. The Sandame sent him a curious glance as he noticed his movement but didn't make any motion to either stop him or ask what he was doing. The blonde soon found himself next to Asuma and Kurenai, noticing with great distaste that the Inuzuka boy was actually taller than him. He resisted the urge to sigh. Nothing he did seemed to help with his height. As soon as they noticed his presence, the two Jonin gave him their greetings. Naruto-san. Kurenai nodded carefully at him. Yo, Naruto. Asuma was much more friendly with him, having been on several missions with the boy in the past. The 12-year-old Jonin kept his voice low as he spoke, in the free month after the preliminaries. They gave him interested glances. Could you drill your genin on killing intent? He didn't worry about explaining why. All Jonin sensei were already informed about the invasion. If you were trusted with the future of Konoha's brightest, then you could count yourself in the inner circles of the village's politics. Whether through choice or not, the four sensei in the room were weighed down by the knowledge of the impending assault on their home. Kurenai frowned immediately, her lack of desire to do as he asked very clear. Asuma, however, had a resigned look on his face, and Naruto could tell the experienced shinobi understood where he was coming from. Better with us than with an enemy, I suppose. The Sarutobi muttered absently. Kurenai narrowed her eyes at him as he spoke but didn't protest. She obviously accepted the necessity of the genin being blooded, even if she didn't like it. At his reply, Naruto bowed slightly. Thank you. As he spoke, Naruto looked over to Kakashi only to see the man in a deep, serious and animated discussion with Guy. The boy could already tell that his elite Jonin counterpart was passing on a similar message. Fortunately, or unfortunately if you consider why, Team 7's encounter with Orochimaru would have already done Kakashi's job for him. Naruto realized with no small amount of consternation that somehow the worlds had aligned to once again allow the Sharingan user to be lazy. As Naruto returned to the Hokage's side, his focus drifted away from the fights occurring below and instead returned to the conversation he and the Hokage recently had about the invasion. From our understanding, Orochimaru will be triggering the invasion with some sort of area-wide jutsu. The Sandame explained carefully on the roof of the Hokage tower, Naruto listening intently behind him. The man stared out across the village as he spoke. When this occurs, you are to first and foremost stop it. I don't care how, just do it. Consider yourself damage control. Naruto nodded. Of course, Hokage-sama. It wouldn't matter what type of jutsu, whether an explosive elemental ninjutsu or a large genjutsu. The Jonin had countless ways to stop anything in its tracks. This comes before dealing with the genin and before me. He narrowed his eyes and turned to stare at Naruto directly. Jiraiya and Tsunade will be by my side. I will not need your help. I understand. The Uzumaki replied softly. I don't want you to get involved with my protection unless absolutely necessary. You are too important to the future of this village. At this point the Hokage's face morphed into a grim expression. At this point, you're more important than me. Do not endanger yourself for my sake. The boy hesitated as he spoke. As you wish, Hokage-sama. There was a bitter taste in his mouth as he spoke, and he knew immediately he wouldn't be following this particular order. Naruto, the man sighed. I'm old and the winds are changing. I can feel it. War is coming, and I'm not going to be able to stop it this time. The leader put his hands on the Jonin's shoulders. You're my proudest accomplishment. I only wish that I could. The man shook his head. After this invasion, things will change irrevocably and, as the legacy of your father, Jiraiya, and of myself, I expect that you'll be thrust into the middle of it. Hokage-sama? Naruto voiced in confusion. I only ask that whatever happens, you'll try to forgive me. The Sandame's face twisted into a distressed expression. Now please leave, I have a lot to think about. It had been an extraordinary conversion. In all his life the Sandame had never been so open and so weak in front of Naruto. He had felt the fear of the man in the air as they spoke. Most terrifying to the young Jonin, however, was that the fear never seemed to be about the Hokage himself. Instead, he almost seemed scared for Naruto. The boy didn't know what to think. Naruto's attention was forced back to the Chunin exam occurring below him as he realized the final fight had finished. The surviving genin had all just been summoned to the floor to receive their allocated opponents for the third and final phase. His eyes drifted over Sasuke's proud form, sneering in distaste at the spandex-wearing genin jumping in joy beside him. When his eyes landed on the Suna Jinchuriki, Naruto felt a suspicious anger flow through him. The use of the boy as a cold-blooded weapon left a horrible feeling in his stomach. The sickly voice of Hayate reverberated around the room. The matchups of the final phase of the Chunin exam are as follows. Rock Lee vs Tamari, Shikamaru Nara vs Shino Aburame, Neji Hyuga vs Kankuro. Gaara vs Sasuke Uchiha and Kiba Inuzuka vs Dosu Kinuda. The man went on to explain the brief period before the third phase, but Naruto didn't remain behind to listen, following the Hokage as he left the tower. It was hours later at one of the countless training grounds dotted around Konoha that Naruto next saw another human being. He had exited the tower and headed straight to a deserted area in order to let out the frustration that had been seeping into him every time he thought of the orders the Sandaime had given him pertaining to the invasion. He was justifiably surprised when he felt the distinct nature of Guy's chakra at the edge of his sense. He had chosen this training ground specifically because of its lack of use. When the spandex-wearing man approached the open land in the forested grounds that Naruto was practicing jutsu, the blonde Jonin stopped his practice immediately and drew back his chakra. Training-related accidents were one of the most common reasons for a ninja to visit a hospital, and right at the top of the list was unintended friendly fire. In order to prevent it happening, most ninja didn't maintain their techniques if they got even the slightest whiff of another leaf nen in the area. Naruto knew Guy would likely be able to dodge anything he threw around, but it didn't hurt to be safe. Naruto. The man grinned as he shouted loudly across the grassy opening. Naruto raised a speculative eyebrow and walked toward the man. When he found himself within speaking distance, he replied, "Guy-san. Please drop the formalities, Naruto-kun, it diminishes my sense of youth." The man strutted over until he was only an arm's distance from Naruto and beamed happily at the boy. "Of course, Guy," Naruto replied easily. There was an aura to the Jonin in front of him that just encouraged you to be comfortable. "I'm afraid I didn't come out here merely to admire your passionate fire for training." Guy's eyebrows wiggled as he spoke, accentuating his words, "Although I must congratulate you on your display of inexhaustible power. I came instead to ask a favor." The man's face grew grave at this point, although Naruto felt it was put on. "You see, my wonderful student Rock Lee is matched up against a Suna nen who is known to specialize in food and jutsu." Naruto's eyes narrowed. "I don't suppose my preference for food and might have something to do with you being out here?" The boy's mind whirled through possible reasons for the man requesting his help. The fact that it was related to his student implied that he wanted Naruto to assist the boy in some way. His mention of the Suna ninja, Tamari, also indicated that perhaps the man wished for Naruto to help the boy overcome the dangers of wind techniques. "Ah, perceptive as ever, Naruto-kun. My rival was right to praise you." Naruto felt pride surge through his chest at the mention that Kakashi had spoken well of him. "I do indeed ask for your expertise on wind. You see, I wish for my student to be able to defend against any attacks that might dim his flames of youth in battle. In particular, I fear for his inability to escape food, and his speed can help against elements, but wind is intangible. It is difficult for Lee to protect himself against something he cannot see." Ah, Naruto realized. Lee can't sense the chakra that wind techniques gather because of his condition. That was a particularly bad weakness, especially for a ninja that relied on taijutsu. He'd be opening himself up to attacks from chakra blades. "So you want me to train him?" Naruto asked curiously. Because despite understanding the logic behind Guy seeking him out, he wasn't sure how he could teach the boy to defend against food and if he couldn't summon chakra. "Oh no, I was simply wondering if you'd be willing to attack him with your own techniques." The maddening expression on his face didn't help his cause. "I want Lee to feel and understand the overwhelming power of wind. I want him to be able to predict it when he knows it's coming." Naruto understood that he wanted the Uzumaki to batter Lee with his own techniques so the boy could be prepared to deal with it in the future. It was a barbaric way to train, but from what Naruto had heard before, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary for the teacher and student. "I'm not sure my techniques are, well suited to training," Naruto explained. And it was true. Most of his elemental jutsu had the intention to kill or at least severely damage. What about Asuma? The man was Konoha's foremost expert on food, and even if he lost to Naruto in raw ability, the Sarutobi more than made up for it in experience and theoretical knowledge. His student, Shikamaru-kun, has reached the final stage, and I do not wish to prevent Asuma from fanning his flames of youth. Naruto translated it as, "He'll be busy training, and don't worry about hurting Lee. He can handle anything you throw at him." Naruto gave the man worried stare. "If you're sure, I'd be happy to." "Yosh, I'll contact you soon then." Guy grinned madly as he bowed in thanks. The four sat silently around the table, the tea in front of them remaining untouched. The little room they were using to talk was one of the countless conference rooms in the Hokage Tower, consisting merely of a table and set of chairs with a few impersonal decorations dotting the walls. All in all, it was a very normal, nondescriptive thing, which was precisely the reason they had chosen to meet in it. It wouldn't do for anyone in the village to hear what they were discussing, nor to even know they were talking at all. If a ninja of the village saw them together, suspicions would be drawn. The warmonger and the leader talking was never a good sight. Even seeing the aged team of the first Hokage gathering was worrying. Their tolerance of each other's presence had whittled down to nothing more than respect over the years, as the three of them continued to disagree with one another constantly. Kaharu broke the silence first. "And you've made the appropriate preparations?" She worded her question carefully, knowing if she misstepped, the man in front of her would clam up and remain silent. "Of course," the Sandame replied, "no matter what happens, we'll be ready. We'll recover." At this, the bandaged man opposite Hiruzen raised his visible eyebrow in mild surprise. If the Hokage had meant what he thought he did, then the village was certainly going to be an interesting place after the invasion. "And I suppose we can't know anything?" Homura asked lightly. The Hokage wasn't surprised by his old teammates' amused acceptance of what he had said. Of the two, Homura had always placed more faith in the Sandame, though interestingly the roles reversed when the Yondaime had been in power. While the elders both respected the late Hokage greatly, Kaharu had seemed to have complete and utter faith in the man's ability to lead the village, while Homura only trusted him as much as was necessary. Now where would the fun be in that? At this, the Sandame even managed to draw a grin across his face. Danzo's eyes narrowed at the sight. "Just what games are you up to, Hiruzen?" He hadn't seen a look of such unbridled arrogance and cheekiness on the Sarutobi's face for years, perhaps even decades. The man had obviously done something big. Another smirk was his only reply. Naruto wasn't sure what to expect when he showed up at the training ground that Guy and Lee frequented, although he knew that the sight of the two of them doing single-finger push-ups with boulders on their legs certainly wasn't it. The trees and training dummies in the surrounding area were completely trashed, indicating the two had been hard at work for some time. When Guy noticed his approach, the man immediately stopped what he was doing and jumped back to a standing position. Lee quickly followed suit, and before he knew it, Naruto was greeted loudly and enthusiastically by the two as they darted forward with wide grins. "Naruto-kun." Guy beamed. "It's good to see you here. Uzumaki-san, Guy-sensei has described your youth and exuberance in great detail." Lee bowed lowly as he spoke. Naruto didn't know what to say. "Ah, well, thank you, I'm humbled by your praise." The blonde added slowly, unsure how to approach the conversation. "Oh, such modesty. You blind me with your passionate character." Guy seemed to be crying at this point, and not for the first time Naruto wondered if it had been a good decision to agree to help the two. Lee nodded sagely as his teacher spoke. "You honor me with your presence, Uzumaki-san. I am eternally grateful for your help." At this, the boy prostrated himself in thanks. Feeling uncomfortable, Naruto decided that enough was enough and gestured cautiously for the boy to stand up. "It's no trouble, really. It's good to practice my foot and jutsu anyway. And please, just call me Naruto." "Of course, Naruto-san." Guy, satisfied with the conversation between the Jonin and his student, announced loudly, "Yosh. Lee, it's time for your real training to begin. Go to the other side of the ground and prepare yourself." The boy replied with a loud shout of enthusiasm and a fist pump into the air before darting away from the two Jonin. "I guess I should work out what jutsu to use, then." Naruto muttered blankly. "Please don't hold back on Lee, Naruto-kun." Guy spoke seriously, his voice holding a dark tone. "I would rather you injure him now than he die in a month's time." The Uzumaki knew that the spandex-wearing ninja was not referring to Temari specifically, rather, he feared for his student's safety during the invasion. A weakness against wind techniques was especially dangerous if up against Sunanen. Naruto grimaced in muted acceptance. "I promise, I'll make sure he understands the dangers of the wind." Some weeks later, Naruto watched silently from the cage booth as Lee jumped down into the arena with a grin spread across his face. Tamari, the Suna genin he was matched up against, followed behind him at a much slower pace. As Lee bounced around excitedly on the arena floor, her face twisted into a look of distaste, and it was clear she thought of the spandex-wearing genin as nothing more than a fool. Which, Naruto realized, was probably half the reason Guy, and inevitably Lee through imitation, put on his silly act around enemies. His foolish and obnoxious behavior encouraged you to see him as an idiot and underestimate him. Those that did soon learned why Guy was a shoe-in for the next Elite Jonin opening. It was unnerving how dangerous Guy could be when he got serious, and now Naruto could see him passing on his habits to his students. That wasn't to say the two weren't actually like this, they truly did believe what they said. It just didn't hurt that it also made people see them as pests, rather than as dangerous foes. Lee himself was still beaming, and when Tamari finally arrived in front of him, the boy saluted at her. "Yosh. I look forward to an exciting match, Tamari-san. HMPH, we'll see." The girl sneered at him. Hayate seemed to take this as his cue and moved between the two genin, raising his hand. All around the stadium, ninja, nobles and civilians alike all bent forward in anticipation, waiting for the first match of the third phase of the Chunin exam to start. It was what they had paid for, to see two upcoming and talented genin fight it out for the chance to be promoted. Rock Lee of Konoha versus Tamari of Suna, begin. And with that, Hayate brought his hand down in a chopping motion before quickly backpedaling to the edge of the arena ground. Tamari herself immediately jumped backwards at his announcement, intending to keep as much distance away from the taijutsu specialist in front of her as possible. She had seen the way the boy had easily dispatched his opponent in the preliminaries and knew if she let him get too close he'd do the same to her. Lee meanwhile stood completely still and watched as the girl moved, analyzing her stance and the way she glided across the air. The ninjas spectating with decent experience under their belt instantly recognized his actions for what they were. Lee, being a user of close-quarter combat, was already trying to work out her pattern of movement. Her preference for her right side, reliance on her legs as support when landing, and instinctual need to lean slightly forward at all times were all immediately noticed by the Leaf Nin. Temari's desire to escape his range had already damaged her chances in the match. Naruto knew if Lee had more experience and knowledge, he would have recognized that the absence of any arms being used for support meant a reliance on a weapon of some sort, and that her need to lean forward indicated that some of the jutsu she used pushed her backwards in some way. But the boy was only a genin, and so the blonde jonin knew that while Lee had seen the habits of the girl, he wasn't able to process why they were habits. Regardless, Lee looked very pleased by what he had seen. "If you don't want to come to me, then I'll come to you." And with that he darted forwards, toward where the girl was. Tamari, to her credit, didn't look very worried by his approach and instead pulled something off of her back. It appeared to be a large fan of some sort, and Naruto's eyes narrowed when seeing it. The Suna nin had gotten through the preliminary fights solely through taijutsu and some basic Fuutin techniques, so they hadn't known about her use of Tessenjutsu. Naruto hadn't thought to prepare Lee for such weapons, mainly focusing on the dangers of wind-enhanced blades, an oversight he was now seriously regretting. In the distance in one of the stands, Naruto could see Guy's eyes narrowing in worry. Lee himself didn't seem entirely distraught by the fan's appearance and instead turned to look directly at Guy. In that moment the blonde jonin could almost see a conversation going on between the two as Lee gave a questioning gaze at his teacher before the man replied with a small, subtle nod. Lee obviously knew what he had received permission to do because he immediately grasped his leg warmers and pulled them off his body. The arena hushed into a confused silence, wondering why the boy was undressing in the middle of the fight. "I'm sorry, Tamari-san, but I'll have to end this fight quickly." And as he finished speaking, the genin dropped the leg warmers. Two loud booms reverberated through the stadium as what Naruto now recognized as weights hit the ground and created craters from the impact. Ninja and civilians alike openly gaped at the display, realizing that the appearance they had previously ridiculed the Konoha nin for was actually a way to hide his true strength. Before even a sound could erupt, Lee had moved. To lower-ranking ninja he was nothing but a blur. Naruto could follow his movements easily but found himself impressed regardless. The boy was a genin, yet he was displaying speeds that rivaled many of the jonin of the village. Before the Suna Kunoichi could even blink, she found a fist in her face and was flying through the air, colliding with the wall and crumpling in a heap. Lee immediately followed her and prepared to strike again, but Temari managed to get over her shock in time to gesture wildly with her fan. Kamaitachi no Jutsu. She screamed loudly as hundreds of invisible blades were created from wind and sent toward Lee. To his credit, the Konoha genin didn't panic and quickly took action to avoid being hit. Naruto almost leant forward in anticipation. This moment would show whether he had been successful in helping Lee prepare for the exams. Over the month the boy did seem to understand and grasp the methods to sense and avoid food and jutsu, but to do it in a real battle was another thing entirely. Naruto couldn't help but feel a small amount of relief hit him as he saw the boy instantly react to the jutsu and jump backwards. His decision to put as much distance as possible between him and Temari was the right one. From what Naruto could tell, the girl's technique was wide-scale and frontal. The only way to avoid being hit was to either go far enough to the left or right of it to not be hit, counter with an equally strong one, or, as what Lee did, move outside of the range of it. Naruto could feel the chakra infused in the wind begin to collapse as it struggled to reach Lee before finally give out completely. As soon as it did, Lee disappeared from his spot, flying at top speed toward the Chunin. Temari was still panting in exertion from trying to extend her jutsu farther than possible, and so was unable to defend herself against the brutal barrage of hits that Lee got in. As more and more made contact, the crowd began to buzz in excitement, tasting the blood of the first match in the air. Eventually, Lee completed his vicious attack with a kick to the girl's midsection that sent her crashing once again into the wall. This time she didn't stand back up. Winner by knockout, Rock Lee of Konoha. Several matches later, Naruto focused on the match occurring below him, witnessing Kakashi's student rapidly moving through a set of hand seals. When he finished, the boy reared his head back and blew a large fireball out of his mouth. The fire moved rapidly toward his opponent, the Suna Jinchuriki Gaara, until it suddenly clashed with the boy's sand defense. The fire roared loudly in defiance as it fought to overpower the sand, but ultimately it failed and disappeared. No longer any chakra left to power it. The smoke cleared and Gaara could be seen folding his arms, not a scratch on him. Sasuke only seemed to grin at the terrible situation he found himself in, which was curious in and of itself. If the Uchiha couldn't puncture Gaara's sand defense through neither taijutsu nor ninjutsu means, then there didn't appear to be a way for him to win the match. And from the bloodlust that was on the redhead's face, he seemed to realize this too. In fact, it might be best if the raven-haired boy forfeit to avoid his own death. Only when Naruto noticed Sasuke gathering chakra around his right hand with the distinct sound of screeching did the blonde boy realize why Kakashi's student was smirking. He was going to use Chidori, an assassination technique, on the Jinchuriki's sand in an attempt to break through. As he finished charging the attack up, Sasuke charged at his opponent, the lightning licking the air and damaging the wall as he moved. Sasuke was soon in front of Gaara and without missing a beat shoved his hand forward, the lightning cutting through the first part of the sand defense like butter. When his hand finally hit the redhead's shoulder, there was a loud cracking sound and the jutsu quickly disintegrated. For a moment nothing happened until Gaara suddenly blew the Uchiha away viciously with a swipe of sand. As the Uchiha crashed into the wall on the opposite side, a loud, crazed laugh could be heard erupting from the Jinchuriki's mouth. Blood was trickling down from a wound on his shoulder courtesy of Chidori, but he seemed to ignore it, instead choosing to laugh madly. The stadium was silent to the sight of the boy's insanity until suddenly the boy grimaced and bent at the waist. He held his head in his hands and moaned in pain. Naruto. The Sandaime growled from his seat. Naruto, nodded imperceptibly from his position in the shadows of the cage box, understood. And he did understand. The Suna Jinchuriki was close to breaking point, which meant, more significantly, that the invasion was about to begin. He had just been ordered to initiate his own defensive protocols. The blonde Jonin moved quickly to the edge of the box in preparation to jump down. From the corner of his eyes he could see the cage, Orochimaru in disguise, watching his actions in mild interest. Blood? My blood! Gaara's scream pierced the air as feathers began to fall around the stadium. When the genjutsu began to come into effect, Naruto immediately sprang into action. He jumped into the center of the arena just as the Suna Jinchuriki disappeared out of it with the assistance of his siblings. Explosions could be heard around the village and the distinct sounds of war erupted. A cacophony of screaming, shouting and weapons colliding. Naruto himself ignored the chaos around him, instead focusing within himself to draw chakra out from within. In seconds he had gathered an amount that would hold most Jonins in their place before suddenly releasing it in a single pulse. It flew outward, dispelling the genjutsu's effects on anyone caught in its range. Konoha civilians and ninja alike shivered as the simultaneously soothing and malicious hit them. Its nature courtesy of Naruto's training in harnessing the Kyuubi. Those who recognized the particular owner of it let out a small sigh of relief, the knowledge that one of Konoha's best was already engaging in the battle reassuring them. As soon as he was satisfied that the chakra pulse had successfully overwhelmed the jutsu, Naruto moved on to his next course of action, that of directing and managing the genin. He jumped toward the competitor's box, knowing that many of the most talented genin would be gathering there. He found himself face to face with a group of confused ninja, kids his own age, some with anxious but resigned looks on their faces and others with ones of unadulterated terror. When they noticed his approach, almost all of them stopped their bickering and turned to him. Even Sasuke, who had previously been preparing to give chase to the Jinchuriki, gave him his full attention. None of them seemed willing to speak until finally a young blonde girl wearing a purple outfit stepped forward. "What's going on?" Naruto recognized the girl as Inoichi's daughter and gave her an appraising look. She looked scared, but the fact that she had spoken first made it clear she was one of the more confident of the group. Naruto was glad he could see the sliver of fear in her eyes. She needed to keep her on her toes. "Konoha is being invaded." He spoke calmly and ignored the gasps of shock and fear. "As we speak, Suna and Otto ninja are attacking the village." What? Why? This time it was Chaozu's boy, Choji, who spoke. Naruto replied quickly, "The why is irrelevant. You all now have a duty to your home. As genin, you're expected to facilitate the evacuation of all civilian and non-combat personnel." As he said this, he gestured to the arena around him, the sight of a dozen screaming civilians being cut down by a wind jutsu visible to all. "You're to break into 2 groups and disperse to all public buildings." Naruto knew there were Chunin posted at the hospital and academy already, but it never hurt to be safe. "Hold on a minute, what if I want to fight?" The boy who spoke was clearly an Inuzuka. If his clan markings didn't reveal it, then his brash attitude did. "Absolutely not. You have no real combat experience to prepare you for what you would face. Do as I say and you might survive the day." Naruto dismissed the boy's statement, finding little time to even entertain the thought. This time Hiroki spoke. "Who says I have to listen to you anyway?" "Yeah, who do you think you are?" Naruto didn't give Kiba time to finish his sentence, releasing the control he had over his chakra and pumping it into the air. The air around him began to shift, shimmering with the strength of his energy. The ground cracked under him and dirt flew up and spun around the Jonin. The air itself was saturated in his presence, the combined calming taste of his nature-orientated chakra and evil, terror-inspiring demonic chakra of his tenant practically tangible. For the genin, it was unlike anything they'd ever felt. Even Team 7's experiences with Orochimaru hadn't been like this. They felt like they were suffocating and struggled to even stand. Sweat broke out across their brow and a few looked close to fainting. "Are you disobeying a direct order of an elite Jonin of Konoha?" Naruto spoke softly, contrasting with his dangerous temperament. Kiba and Hiroki couldn't even find it in themselves to reply and instead fell to their knees. And then as soon as it had started, it was gone. Naruto withdrew his presence and the genin gasped for breath. The pressure lifted, but their eyes stayed wide open. Sasuke in particular stared at the Jonin with shock. Here was someone his own age who could bring him to his knees with killing intent alone. Only when Itachi had slaughtered the clan had he ever felt so helpless before. "Understand this, genin. I am not the strongest ninja participating in this battle. Perhaps I am not even one of the strongest." If possible, their eyes widened even more. This was the power of someone not even at the top? "I need you to realize this battle is beyond you. Instead, I expect you to complete these orders to the best of your ability. Lives depend on it." At this, Shikamaru stepped in reluctantly. "Don't worry, I'll make sure we do it. I'm sure you have somewhere to be." Naruto stared at him through narrowed eyes. The intelligence hidden behind that lazy exterior could clearly be seen. This Nara was one for the future. "Yeah," Kiba added shakily, still shivering, I'll do what you say." It was clear the Inuzuka's primal instincts were flaring up, telling him to obey. If there was anything that clan respected, it was power. Naruto himself extended his senses around him and felt the strength of the genin positioned in front of him. He looked at their expressions, some fearful and others arrogant and cocksure. He knew he had to leave some of them in charge, at least to prevent any further issues. Immediately his eyes caught those of the male Hyuga. The boy was standing silently, his body tensed and ready for battle. His confident eyes belied an appropriate nervousness, and Naruto felt pleased by what he saw. He remembered the boy's fight against the Suna puppeteer. It had been brutal and efficient, the Hyuga ignoring the puppets and instead quickly disabling the opposing genin in minutes. It had been impressive. Finally, his thoughts returned to the Nara. He knew the boy was intelligent, immeasurably so, because of his experiences with his father. Genius like that simply had to run in the family. Along with that, he had seen it in action against the Aburame genin. Using a series of tricks involving kunai and ninja wire, the Nara had manipulated the stadium into giving him an angle for his shadow jutsu to be used. The boy definitely had cunning behind the lazy exterior. Neji Hyuga, Shikamaru Nara. The two stiffened as soon as he spoke. Consider yourselves promoted to Chunin. Work out the two groups and lead one each. Neji, take the most physically able genin to the south of the village to evacuate there. It's closer to the front lines. Shikamaru, take everyone else to the north. You will have a much greater number of civilians to deal with. The north of the village was much more well protected and closer to evacuation points, so most civilians bought houses in the area. Prepare for the possibility of enemy forces, don't trust anyone. Dispel genjutsu every 30 seconds and flare your chakra every 15. The Anbu HQ had a war room synced to every Konoha ninja's chakra signature, and so the flares would serve to update those in charge on troop movements. Naruto turned away from the genin. Good luck. And have faith, we're stronger than them, smarter than them, and we have something much more important to fight for. At this he saluted the group before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. Shikamaru and Neji immediately looked at each other in apprehension, while the rest of the genin gaped at the spot the Jonin had disappeared at. Man, that guy is crazy. At a withering glare Sakura sent him, Hiroki added, crazy strong, that is. Ahihihi. Naruto quickly returned to the cage box only to find it empty. The area itself was trashed beyond recognition, and it was clear a small skirmish of some sort had already occurred. Despite his best efforts, the blonde Jonin couldn't prevent the anxiety curling into a knot in his stomach. The absence of the Sandaime and his bodyguards meant he had certainly missed Orochimaru's reveal. This, in turn, meant they were surely already fighting somewhere. Closing his eyes, Naruto extended his chakra out, searching for the presence of the Sannin or Hokage. It took him a few moments before he finally sensed the powerful healing chakra of Tsunade several hundred meters in the distance toward the center of the village. He didn't waste any more time, pushing out of the cage box with great speed. To anyone under Jonin, he would only be a blur when he passed them. His speed had always been one of his greatest attributes, and right now he was putting it to full use as he raced across half the village in only seconds. Soon he found himself approaching the chakra of Tsunade, and so prepared himself for what he might find. He couldn't feel the Sandaime or Jiraiya with her, which was incredibly worrying, but chose not to dwell on it. As he jumped across one final roof, he could finally see the prostrated figure of the legendary Med Nen. From what he could see, there weren't any enemies around, but the woman seemed to be frozen in place. Fearing she was trapped by a jutsu of some sort, Naruto quickly moved in front of her. Blood seemed to be all over her face and hands, but from what he could see she didn't have any visible wounds. That meant the blood must have come from someone else. Worst case scenario, it could have been the Sandaimes, but somehow Naruto doubted it. Something about the entire situation seemed off. Tsunade still wasn't moving and seemed oblivious to his presence. "Tsunade-sama?" he intoned softly. There wasn't any obvious reaction to his question until the Sannin suddenly looked up and stared blankly into the distance behind Naruto. The blonde Jonin looked at her face and noticed her vacant expression. It was almost as if she wasn't there. For a moment he contemplated the possibility of a genjutsu, but dismissed it when he realized that someone with her chakra control would have little trouble resisting any array of illusions. What she was experiencing almost seemed psychological. Naruto's eyes jolted wide open. Her apprentice mentioned a fear of blood. The Uzumaki could recall the young girl, Shizune, quietly mentioning it to him when they were traveling back to Konoha. He frowned. If it was true and she was really this stricken by hemophobia, then she'd be useless for the invasion. Naruto quickly grabbed the lady's arms and pulled her up from her position on the floor. He dragged her none too kindly toward a building and moved her inside. He didn't have time to be careful with her, and so as soon as she was safe he stood. "If you can hear me, pull yourself together and go help the injured," Naruto murmured to her before turning and leaving the building. If he'd had a moment he would have cleaned Tsunade up and coaxed her out of her mind, but he had already been away from the Sandaime for too long as it was, and so left her alone in the building. He just had to hope she survived. Just as Naruto left the area, Tsunade had collapsed. A loud cracking boom could be heard across the village. It was so thunderous and powerful that Naruto could see the numerous fights surrounding him taking pause to work out what they had just heard. It lasted only a second, and as soon as it was over, ninja resumed their battles, realizing whatever made that sound was irrelevant to them specifically. Naruto, however, knew very few ninja in the village could make such a resounding and overbearing show of force as the sound that had just echoed. In fact, the blonde knew that perhaps only himself, the Sandaime and the Sannin could use jutsu that could affect the landscape to that degree, so Naruto quickly moved in the direction that the sound had come from, hoping that he wasn't too late for whatever he was about to stumble onto. The 12-year-old commander arrived at the location in a single minute, traversing a distance that would take most ninja at least 5. What he found himself looking at him was terribly worrying. The Sandaime was breathing heavily, and Naruto realized it must have been him that released the loud sound earlier, and facing off against a grinning Orochimaru. Jiraiya was nowhere in sight. Naruto took a moment to steady his breathing before he darted down and landed softly next to the Sandaime. Entering a battle of this magnitude was not something the boy had ever faced. Not even when Hanzo had been chasing him across the border had he been so outclassed, the AIM Nin treating young Naruto as an amusement more than anything. As he landed, Naruto could see Orochimaru's grin twist into something of a grimace. Clearly the Snake Nin had planned to engage with his sensei alone. The Sandaime meanwhile gave the blow a cursory glance before sighing deeply in sadness. The Uzumaki could already imagine the thoughts flashing through the Hokage's mind. He too would have wanted to fight alone. Not out of a foolish arrogance or vendetta, but out of a desire to avoid others being caught in the crossfire. Unfortunately for him, Naruto wasn't going to abandon him, even if he was ordered to. In seconds Orochimaru had regained a smirk on his face. "Ah, the young Namikaze. What a pleasant surprise." His grin widened. "I'd love to see how you fare, from one of Sensei's pets to another." The way the man spoke made it clear that he saw Naruto's relationship with the Sandaime as something to loathe. The Jonin realized he must, to some degree, imagine himself being where Naruto was in the past. "Naruto," the Sandaime intoned. "Where is Jiraiya-sensei?" Naruto asked softly, content with the pause in the fight that his appearance had granted. "I sent him to deal with the Jinchuriki," the Sandaime explained. "He should be back soon. When he is, I expect you to leave." The way he spoke indicated there was no room for argument. Naruto hesitated from answering before accepting that when the Sannin returned, the battle would turn into something outside of his league. His presence here was affording a brief respite. The Snake Sannin would likely toy around with him for a bit in an effort to get under his skin. Of course, Hokage-sama. Naruto submitted, comfortable that he would at least protect his leader until someone more capable arrived. "Oh, I think you misunderstand, sensei." Orochimaru's voice cut through their conversation, a wicked grin on his face. "From now on no one will be leaving and no one will be entering." Naruto sported a look of confusion while the Sandaime went stock still for a second before turning to the blonde Jonin with a wild look in his eyes. "Naruto, get out now." But even before his sentence, a huge purple barrier erected around the rooftops they were standing on. It covered the sky with a violet glow, and the Uzumaki knew immediately that it would continue underground. In a twisted sense of timing, as soon as the barrier appeared, a squad of Anbu arrived just outside its confines. "Hokage-sama," a purple-haired woman wearing a cat's mask shouted loudly. The two-leaf nin inside ignored the new arrivals, understanding that their presence was now entirely irrelevant to their situation. And now, Orochimaru began, for the main act. As he spoke, his hands morphed into a set of seals, and out of nowhere 3 coffins rose. They each had kanji on them, denoting first, second and fourth. Naruto stared at the jutsu in confusion while the Sandaime looked on with narrowed eyes, clearly analyzing the situation. Suddenly, without warning, the door to the first burst open and a figure stepped out of the box. The two couldn't tell yet who it was as smoke had kicked up upon its opening. As they strained their eyes, Orochimaru glided over to the person and hit the back of their neck with something. He stood away again and stared at the two of them in bated breath. The Sandaime was the first to react when the figure could finally be seen clearly, Hashirama-sensei. He breathed in awe, for in front of them stood the first Hokage. The forefather of the ninja villages and perhaps the most powerful person who had ever been involved with Konoha. When Sarutobi spoke, Naruto's eyes widened and he darted to the other two coffins in sudden realization. Before either of them could launch a single jutsu, however, they could see the other two coffins had already opened and Orochimaru was moving away from them. When the Nidaime's visage could be made out through the smoke, Naruto couldn't stop the fear assaulting his mind. This battle had just gotten so incredibly ahead of him that it was no longer a battle of ninja but one of gods. He felt out of place in the presence of these legends. Tobirama-sensei, the Sandaime spoke again before darting his eyes over to the coffin with forth on it. No. He almost screamed in worry as he realized that the two of them might soon be facing the combined might of the Senju brothers and Naruto's father, the Yondaime. With just the two dead Hokage, the Sandaime felt he might have had a chance, but the Yondaime as an addition would end any hope. Naruto himself found his heart pounding as the smoke cleared on the final coffin. Yondaime? He queried with bated breath. Fortunately for the two living Konoha ninja, they were greeted with the sight of a still dead Sound Genin. Orochimaru tutted in disappointment. I should have known not even this jutsu could steal the man back from the Shinigami's stomach. His voice was mockingly petulant, as if he was a child who had just had his toy confiscated. Oh well, this should still be fun. Naruto realized with a sick twist in his stomach that he was both relieved and disappointed that Namikaze Minato hadn't stepped out of the coffin, missing out on the chance to see his father. Tobirama interrupted his thoughts. I never thought that my cursed jutsu would be used on us, brother. And from the looks of things against Konoha too. Hashirama spoke whimsically, even in death his lively nature shining through. Isn't that your little monkey, brother? Tobirama stared intensely at the Sandaime. Hiruzen. He looked over at Naruto and stared in confusion, and an Uzumaki. I can sense Mito's blood in you. Hashirama sighed in sadness. You look old, Hiruzen. Despite the situation, Sarutobi couldn't help but chuckle. I am old, sensei. It's been half a century since Tobirama-sensei died. Hashirama grinned. Then clearly you have been a good Hokage, to have lasted this long. At this he focused his attention on Naruto, and you. And Uzumaki bearing the curse of the Kyuubi. The man's face suddenly contorted into something of shock, and to have my chakra in your body. If you survive this battle you will be something great, little Uzumaki. All those present, even Tobirama, sported looks of confusion when the normally rambunctious Senju, with great severity, implied Naruto was related to him. The Sandaime in particular found himself surprised. He had thought he knew about all of the secrets of his prodigious grandson. My name, Naruto spoke carefully, is Naruto. As he spoke, Orochimaru could be seen molding chakra into a single hand seal. As he did this, both revived leaders went still before beginning to emanate their chakra. Well then, child of the sage, let's see if you can survive. And at that, the Mokuton user launched himself at Naruto. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.